Menehune Ditch over at Waimea, Kauai. You got this ditch that was 22 feet high, raised up alongside the poly, and it had an alwai on the top and a footpath. So it's pretty well out from the poly in a river that's pretty strong, and when it's in flood, it's really ripping down through there. And to me, if you didn't have that wall, if you just had built up a big wall and filled it with dirt behind like you would out in ordinary land, it's not going to make it. As soon as the flood pulls one stone loose and gets in there, it's just going to crumble that whole thing down, and it's coming down the first year you built it. I think it's got to be linked to that wall somehow. They didn't have big iron bolts back then, right? So I look at the top of the Menehune Ditch, which is all you can see now, and I look at old drawings, and you can see some of the stones are fitted. You know, the stone goes along, then it drops down, it has a notch, and the next stone has a nose that comes out and fits right into that. That's fitted stonework. The sides are flatted, the tops are flatted, and so on. Unlike other things in Hawaii, you don't see that. And then some of the fish ponds supposedly are like that, and somebody told me at my talk on Wednesday over there that there's 7 miles of alwai down near Kuhio Park, near Poipu, and he said the stones in that heavy flowing alwai are dressed. Now, if I went to see it and I could see it had been done with a hammer, you know, like a welding hammer or something today, I wouldn't pay much attention. But if it's been pecked with a stone and those stones are dressed from a long time ago, that's unheard of in Hawaii. That's the kind of stuff you see in Peru and Bolivia, where they did unbelievable stonework. So we happened to go to Peru with our archaeological society one time, and we were at Cuzco, which is the highest city. The Spanish would build their churches on top of Inca temples, showing their superiority, right? They'd use some of the stone, they knock down the temple, they build their church. So it starts pouring down rain, and we go in this big plaza. They got buildings that are built like a big square, and inside is a plaza, and then you've got 1 or 2 or 3 floors of shops or living quarters or whatever. So we go in there, and here's this big sheets of plexiglass because they're making a new door for the church to go out the back where there's been the Inca temple, right? And you can see the beautiful face stones of the Inca work. All these stones just fit together just perfect, and they're all perfect flat on the outside. Awesome work. But inside, you could see what was inside. And there were all these holes and grooves and things on the stones on the inside. So then we come out, we see the local people going in this room. We go in the room, they get a bunch of these stones are lying on the floor, and you can look at them. So the stone is all dressed flat on the outside. On the other side has puka, 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 and the other one puka, 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 and the other one has some grooves or something. And they're made so if you got the right kind of a stone, you can have this stone sitting here that has a couple big, sort of, what would you say, short cylinders sticking up. And you drop this one down on these cylinders here, and you drop this one down on these cylinders here, and then you put another one on top that fits into the top of that linking stone. Now you got 3 stones linked together, and the earthquakes can't touch it. That's why those things last for hundreds of years, where with any kind of ordinary masonry, they're going to get busted up by the bad earthquakes. So we just happen to see this stuff. And I just happen to know Bennett's book, Archaeology of Kauai, and I happen to know in the back where they got the illustrations, they got one page that says these odd rubbers, they don't know what they are. And I look at the picture of the rubbers, it's stones like that with these pedestals sticking up and funny little hooks on the top and stuff. It's like those linking stones in Peru that we just by miraculous chance happened to see because it started to rain. And I just happen to know those 2 things, and I happen to know that Kauai is famous for menehunes. So I look at Peruvians, and I looked up Peruvians on the internet, some of the shortest people on earth. Aha, that's interesting, you know. How could Peruvians get to Hawaii? Where do the glass balls wash up from the current that comes from southern Canada and northern California? The current comes out to Hawaii. Glass balls from the Sea of Japan get washed all the way up along the Aleutian chain of islands, that's to the west and south of Alaska, along the coast of Alaska, and all the way down the coast of Canada to southern Canada and northern California, and then it veers out and it comes to Hawaii. So where do you find the best glass balls from the Sea of Japan? Niihau and the southern coast of Kauai. I didn't even know that till a year or 2 ago. Aha. Well, if some Inca raft got in that current, it would carry them out to Hawaii. So when the Spanish came up the coast of South America by the mid-1500s, and they got up to Peru, up at the northern part of the west side of South America, here's the Peruvians in these giant balsa wood rafts with sails and big boards that they let down between the that then became rudders and keels, so they weren't at the mercy of the winds. They could steer those things. They could tack with these giant rafts. And the Spanish are astounded to see them in the open ocean, not sailing along the coast watching the shore like the Spanish wanted to do if they possibly could. They're out sailing in the open ocean. And they tell the Spanish there's land out there, about 10 days sail to the west. And then you go another 3 or 4 more, there's more land. Well, somebody over there came and told them and lived with them long enough to tell them about those lands, or they went there and sailed back. So later the Spanish went sailing out that way in 1595 and found the Marquesas Islands. Almost certainly because the Incas were telling them there's land out there. They were looking for the Marquesas Islands. So you got all these stories and the currents, you know, the current that the Spanish used, they leave Acapulco, which is right about the same latitude as Hawaii, and there's a current from there. Goes out to a little bit south of Hawaii. It gets you, if you keep going, you get to Manila in the Philippines, way the heck on the other side of the Pacific. But to get back, they would leave Manila and sail up by Japan and get up where that current went. Remember I said from the Sea of Japan? That's where they go, clear up along the Aleutians all the way down, and then get past this current that comes out to Hawaii, and they had to sail their way down along the coast till they got to Acapulco. So I'm thinking, you know, one of those if the mast, you know, got demasted in a hurricane or something and got drifted up far enough to get in that current, they could have come to Hawaii and started making Inca-type stonework somewhere like Hawaii, where it's famous from. And then the story about the Menehune says eventually they got tired of being oppressed and things, and they built a big canoe and sailed away. I think it'd be hard to build a big canoe if you're living up Malca, but you could get a whole bunch of logs and everything and then come down and put them together and make a raft enough to sail away on a raft, so that's possible. So what about this crazy idea? Well, in the 1800s, in 1832 and 1852, living people drifted up on the shores of Hawaii. Maui and Oahu, I believe it was. 3 of them were in the newspapers in the 1800s, of living people still on these demasted junks from the Sea of Japan, got all the way to Hawaii and then rescued. And somebody, Charles Kenner or somebody, said there was about 10 of them. They just didn't make the newspaper. That's just Hawaii, a little speck in the middle of the Pacific. So some Swedish guy, in 1876, he wrote to all the places, like the governmental places and the shipping places and so on, all around the eastern side of the Pacific, Hawaii, you know, Ecuador, Mexico, every place, and said, have you ever had people drift up accidentally to your place? So, of course, a lot of them never reached anybody or got filed in the round file or was sent to some supervisor who never read it or something, but they got a lot of information back. One demasted boat made it to Ecuador with 26 people on it. It's unbelievable. They're months out there floating around, but things like this happen. So if we know this stuff happened to Hawaii for sure in the 1800s, it also had other circumstances before. So I got to thinking about all that with the Incas, and it wouldn't necessarily mean that the Menehunes were Incas, but even one person with that knowledge came, they would teach a lot of other people. So if there were some small people, original Aboriginal people, and they hooked up with them, it was a long time ago, then they would be the people that knew that. That's the Menehune. The big guys come here, they drive them all up in the uplands. Guess what was in the first census in Hawaii in the 1830s? The first census on Kauai, way up in the far end of one of the valleys, which would be the least fertile, hardest to live, smallest places for homes and things, on Kauai, on the north shore of Kauai. 65 people listed themselves as Menehune. Now, who are you? 65 of those people in the farthest village way up Malca listed themselves as Menehune. So yeah, the Menehune were some real people of some kind. Who were they? Were they Micronesians? Were they the original people who came here who were very pastoral, and then Pa'au came and brought the human sacrifices in the big house and the regimented society? I don't know, but these things are really interesting things to think about. So there's one other one that's really, really cool, and that's a story on the Big Island. So you got Kealakekua Bay. So Cook comes to Kauai January 1778, sails up to the northwest coast, which he was supposed to do, look for the Northwest Passage. He comes back to Hawaii, sails down past Maui, around the lower coast of the Big Island, gets up to Kealakekua Bay, which is a magnificent anchorage. It's on the Kona side. Lots of people there. There's food, there's firewood, there's water, all sorts of stuff back then. So he anchors there, Kealakekua. It's Makahiki. It was Makahiki the first time, now it's Makahiki. Nobody's attacking him. Nobody's got weapons. He's amazed compared to other places he's been. So they think he's Lono. People go, oh, I didn't think he was Lono. Lono left from Kealakekua a long time before. According to the legend, Kealakekua means the path of the god. That's where he went. And he left and he said, I'll come back sometime on a floating island with lots of goodies. And here comes a ship, and when you furl up the sails, it sure does look like a floating island, and the masts look like tree trunks. It said a floating island with trees on it and lots of goodies. So it matches. He's got all the goodies, and he's in the same place. He came back. So they think he's Lono. So he was just worshipped, Kapa Moe. He'd be carried along somewhere, and the priest would be going ahead shouting, Kapa Moe, Kapa Moe. Everybody better get their face in the dirt. And they took him up on Hikiau Heiau, and they feeded him at the Haleolono like Lono. And so the stories of them thinking he was Lono, but he sure looks like a man, and all the sailors sure act like a man with our women, but maybe he's Lono, and we don't want to make a mistake. So it was a curious, curious time. So now we got Kealakekua established as a site, right? It's a desirable place for Captain Cook to come from once he sailed around on the side. A little bit south of there, there's a reef. Reefs are very uncommon in Hawaii's deep water, but there's a reef a little bit south at Ke'e. They're not down to Honau now, but not very far down, not more than probably 6 or 8 miles at the most from Kealakekua. There's a reef, and so Ke'e is the site, and there's a beach there, and it's named Kulo. Kulo means to be really humble, really crouched down, being just very humble. Named Kulo because there was a shipwreck there, and the people, Au Kai, they swam ashore. It doesn't say they floated ashore, it says Au Kai, they swam ashore. Only aristocrats back then knew how to swim. The sailors never had a chance to learn how to swim. They'd sink like a stone if they didn't hold on to something. A man and a woman, Kukanaloa and Kaikilani, came ashore. They became the ancestors of chiefs and commoners alike. In the time of Lono Ikamakahiki, when he was the chief at Kailua Kona, he was the great-grandson of the famous chief Liloa at Waipio, who was also the father of Umi, all that. So Lono Ikamakahiki, great-grandson of Liloa, was the chief then. So you can count back in the genealogies, about 25 years a generation is the usual one in archaeology, but Polynesians breed sooner because people mature earlier in a Polynesian place. Any place that's warm, much earlier maturation. So more likely the generations will be a little less, maybe 23 years, 24 years on average between generations. But if you go back 25 years a generation, I come up with about 1535 to 1550, definitely. Definitely Spanish in the Pacific at that time, definitely heading out past Kauai, past Hawaii. So I say Spanish ship. Wahine, one of them was a Wahine, Kaikilani, remember? Spanish are some of the very, very few people that allow women on their ships, because women on a ship usually causes a lot of trouble, and sailors learned that a long time ago. But Spanish would have women on their ships, The priests had dog's tail wands, and I think they all came from there. Where did they get these long, bushy dog's tails? Maybe from Spanish spaniels, because they were in the Tuamotus. The Tahitians much valued that long hair. They were certainly from Spanish shipwrecks, I'm sure, too. So here's these two people, maybe more, possibly, some of the sailors maybe held onto something or the Hawaiians went out and rescued them. They named their ship Konoliloha. Konoliloha. South, Kona. Lilo, lost, ha, breath, right? So in the south, something lost its breath. So if you were used to a canoe culture, and every time a canoe fills up with water, it just sinks, right? It doesn't go glub, 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 but when a ship fills up with water and sinks, it's got all these holes, it's got all kinds of places in it that hold air. When it goes down, it's like a drowning person losing their breath. It goes, all these bubbles are coming up. Kona, Lilo, Ha. Because they always name things by characteristics, right? This is my manao anyway. The man swims ashore, he's got all his fancy Spanish stuff on, he's an aristocrat. Stands up out of the water, is an unbelievable person with all this stuff on, and this Hawaiian that's there at the beach cleaning his nuts goes, Kukanaloa, Kukanaloa. The god of the sea just stood up in front of him right there, and he goes screaming off to the village shouting, Kukanaloa. I can see that, can't you? I think that's a real good possibility. That's how he got named that. And ancestors of chiefs and commoners alike. But the kapu, you're aristocratic people, you know all kinds of stuff. You're very attractive to the other people because you're foreigners and you've got some really neat stuff and you know some really neat things. You're definitely going to be in the court of the king and not somewhere else, definitely. But you're free to go anywhere. You can go mix with the commoners, you can mix with the elites. Everybody wants to mate with you because you got all this mana. These cool people that came from somewhere with all this stuff to a Hawaiian manao. These people have an awful lot of mana. So people want, Hawaiians very sexually free anyway, but then they really, commoners especially want to mate with somebody like, because their keiki is elevated in mana instantly. If the father is that, they'd be bragging to everybody. They tell this kid, you're the son of so-and-so on the ship named so-and-so. Different mana'o from today, which is a really good point. We always have to take the time of old, what was their mores, what was their mana'o, what was their purpose, their life always filled with concepts of mana, and not try to apply our modern thinking and our modern morality to what they were doing in the old times. And if we get to the burial parts about human sacrifice and things, then it becomes some really, really interesting concepts, because you're not just going and mating with somebody because it's fun or they're cool or they might give you something. You've got the mana concept. That's a whole different thing. So those two names are in the genealogies of Kamehameha and Liholiho. So, go figure. So you could go, well, this is just a story. It's a story from someplace else, another time, but the beach is named Kulo, and it's still named Kulo after all this time. It's still Kulo. Spanish Catholics would kneel on the beach for a long time praying for their salvation, not to be eaten, not to be killed. Perfect, normal thing to do if you're a Catholic person coming ashore at those times. They named the beach Kulo. Here's these people. Is it true? I came across a story from 240 years later. That's 10 generations later, in which Kamehameha's two sons were going to do a major ceremony on the Heiau, and he was sick. Now the sons are always taught all the high ceremonies because it's really, really important, the Luakini ceremonies. They've got to have it perfect. They know every word and everything in it perfect. So the followers of one son, all these retainers and people have been with him all this time, and the retainers and followers of the other son are all worried about which one will get picked to do the ceremony, because that's going to be the next king. That was Liho that got picked. And it says, the followers of the other sons hung their heads like Kukanaloa Ma at K.A. Or Kulo, I think. Hung their heads, humble like Kulo. So here's an idiom. You have to know this whole story to understand what the idiom means. And it's 10 generations later, I guarantee you that's a true story. That's not something that came from somewhere else. It named the place, it named the person, the site and everything, 10 generations later. So little teeny tidbits in the puzzle like that are really fun things for me. So if that Spanish ship did crash then, they were probably coming up, they saw all the fires, there were lots and lots of Hawaiians at that time living around the bay. They see all the fires, they're sailing in, and wham, they hit the reef, and they sink, and the rest is history. Interesting stuff. So now what about, I talked about all the foreigners, and the Menehunis, yeah? I think we got it. So now let's have some more questions, unless you want me to talk more about that.
What time frame the Menehune versus the Marquesans? What time frame do you think the Menehune came?
Would have come?
Yeah, versus the...
Well, that's a real good question. Now, what's the time frame of when the Menehune might have come, these original people? If you look at Arts and Crafts of Hawaii, the brilliant, brilliant piece of work, he was up on Maui, what was his name? Peter Buck. Tauranga Hiroa. So that's his two names. He was a physician. He went all over the place in the South Pacific, and then he came to Hawaii and ended up being the head of Bishop Museum, and he was just a brilliant researcher, and he had all this stuff in the museum. So he cataloged everything, he examined everything, he measured everything, and he wrote Arts and Crafts of Hawaii. You want to have one book in your collection, one book still in print? Get Arts and Crafts of Hawaii, because it's filled with information. Just every page, just brilliantly written, referenced many times, just tons of information like that. So right in the early part of the book, he says, just within the first 40 pages or so, maybe it's less, he says, and the first people in Hawaii, the Menehunis, just flat out. Now this is an incredibly scholarly person who knows all kinds of legends and everything else, just flatly says the original people were the Menehunis. So the archaeology of Hawaii now, the people who've done the most work with it and looked at the most records and so on, and dating, the more advanced kind of carbon dating that they do now, that kind of pushes things forward instead of back in time, they say Hawaii was settled somewhere around about 1207 to 1215 AD, something like that. That's the first settlers in Hawaii because that's the earliest of anything they've found. I say I don't think that's right because the oral history, the genealogies and everything, yeah, they could come from another place. They could have been brought from another place. Some of these stories and memories could have been. But there's so much stuff in Hawaiian history that suggests they were here a lot longer than that.
In the 1200s, would that be the Marquesans?
Yeah, so they're thinking that they think the first settlement came from the Marquesas.
Yeah.
And then they were here, they were more pastoral people. The people in Marquesas were real fighters because it's real deep valleys where people tended to live in segregated villages and fight the people in the other deep valleys. But they had, the islands weren't near as big as in Hawaii, and they were separate, somewhat different in culture and so on. But they think that the first people were them, and then later a wave of people came from Tahiti, the Society Islands. Lots of legendary things, stories, and origin sites. And that fits pretty good. And then you get Pa'au. He was this priest that came to Hawaii. How many people heard of Pa'au? How many know about Pa'au? So Pa'au comes up to Hawaii, and he is a priest, but he looks at the Hawaiian people, and they're kind of intermingling. The chiefly people and the commoners are kind of intermingling. They're getting a more even society. It's not stratified like down in Tahiti. He thinks this is a real no-no. He goes back, he gets a height. So now we know some people traveled from South America out into the Pacific because they found DNA in the Marquesas and in Mangariva, I believe it is, in the islands, and Easter Island. But now they got proof of that DNA. So the chance that those mainland people sailed out into the Pacific is possible, like we talked about with the accidental voyaging. That's possible. That's always possible. There's a big current from the northern part of South America, in the Turu, Ecuador kind of area there. There's a great big current called the Humboldt Current that goes down toward Easter Island and things. So that would be certainly possible that people could end up going down there. But in the mainland, I've run into several Native American tribes from the California coast who said, oh yeah, we got Hawaiian. So was that the Hawaiian during the time of the fur trade and the whaling trade? Because there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of Hawaiians on the ships back then. especially after the overthrow of the Kapu system, the people that were on the losing side, and some of them just had to leave, you know. That's the way it was in the old times. And you couldn't be a koa anymore. There wasn't any war to be a koa in, so being a koa was get yourself on one of those ships and do some really tough stuff and diving and so on. And so there was prejudice back then, you know, if you had a whole bunch of haole sailors from London or Massachusetts somewhere or something, there'd be some prejudice because you're different, you know, talking the same as them and so on. But the captains loved them because they could swim and they could dive. If their anchor was stuck in the coral, the Hawaiians would go down and get that valuable anchor back. None of their other sailors could do that, but the Hawaiians could. So they loved that, and they were tough and so on. They were in the fur trade. I could go on and on about all that stuff. So there's names, you know, Aloha, Oregon, and things like that. Way up in Alaska, there was people in the fur trade. I read something about a group of Kanakas. That's what they called the Hawaiians back then. All these new people were coming in to replace the trappers at Blackfoot, Idaho on Christmas Day. It is freezing cold in Blackfoot, Idaho. It's snow, it's awful. Here comes the new trappers, and with them is a bunch of Kanakas. So unbelievable stuff. So anyway, they were all over the place, and so it was considered like a warrior-like deed to go on the ships. You know, you're risking your life to go out there. Went all over the world, and some of them ended up, I'm sure, on the East Coast in Massachusetts and the ports because they're a crew on the ship. The ship goes back there to refurbish. Some of them are Hawaiian. They're going to Alaska, all along the coast, all over the place. So in the 1500s, there was a friar, that's a Catholic brother, who was up at a big bay they think was probably San Francisco Bay, and he was writing and said, in a certain year, at a certain season, very dark-complected people would come, and I think he said in double canoe, to trade with the Indians, trade with the coastal Indians. Yeah? So if you're a coastal Indian, you're going to be really, really brown just from being a coastal Indian. And who would be darker than that? Hawaiians had been at sea for a month because the kahunas would know, you know, when you had an El Nino period where you could sail against the usual prevailing winds and get to the mainland. So in a certain year, at a certain season, they would come. So I think that's evidence. And the coastal islands off of California have two-piece fish hooks, like Hawaiian. Some people argued, well, they just developed it on themselves. Well, if that was a common development, why didn't we have them all around the world? But they had that. They had plank canoes where you put canoes together out of pieces of wood. And that's like down in the Tuamotus and other places in the South Pacific, not the Hawaiians because they had big tree trunks. But they had those things, and then the several tribes that I've heard right along the coast who, as I said, oh yeah, we had Hawaiians, but was it old-time Hawaiians? But if the Hawaiians could sail all over the place, the Polynesians could settle every single inhabitable space in the entire vast Pacific. The Pacific is so big you can take all the continents of the world, lay it on the Pacific, and have room left over. It's enormous. So if they could settle every inhabitable island in the entire Pacific, the chance that they didn't make it to the mainland from time to time would be ridiculous. I mean, they surely did that. So we're going to get more and more and more of that DNA, and they're going to sort out more and more and more of who went where in those old times. But that's just one more example. Kuali'i, the famous chief from Oahu, in his long name chant from long ago, there's a segment in there, like 17 lines, and it says, I've been to Kahiki. Now that doesn't mean Tahiti. Kahiki means anything beyond the horizon, because after hundreds of years when they stopped the voyaging in Hawaii and they weren't going back and forth to Tahiti or anywhere, they were just isolated out here in the Pacific. Kahiki began to mean anywhere out beyond the horizon. So he said, I've been to Kahiki, I've seen these white men, and I've seen the animals and people in the sky, or in the clouds, and they peck at their food like birds. So in Hawaiian poetic terms, he's saying to me he saw white people somewhere, somehow, and the animals and the people in the clouds was the miners, you know, up in the mountains are moving around and they got the fog and the clouds up there, and they eat with forks. And you know how the Europeans hold their fork upside down, and when they go peck, peck, peck at their food, that would be a perfect Hawaiian description of how somebody eats with the fork upside down. And he had never seen anything like that before. And then he came back, and so he brags about doing that. I think he was out somewhere and got on a Spanish ship, and they took him, and then he came back. Something like that, because that description would only fit with him going back to Acapulco or something like that on a ship. So if you're stranded out at sea, sometimes you could be picked up by a ship, but far more likely you'd just be brave and get on the ship. So that, what was his name? I can't think of his name. He was a priest in Tahiti and a chief. And in Captain Cook's second voyage, he said, I'm going to go with you. He just picked up and he left and got on Captain Cook's ship, and they went all over the place. And I'm sure he taught Captain Cook Tahitian language to a degree, and that's why he could converse to some degree when he got here with the Hawaiians. Nobody says that, but he couldn't have been on the ship all the way to England, and they brought him back without Captain Cook learning a lot about the history. He knew all about the islands in the Pacific in his mind in a different view that we would have, more in a distances. Like we have an overhead view, right? When we think of things on a map, it's like we're in an observation balloon above looking down at everything. I mean, the Hawaiians couldn't do that, but their thoughts, he sat down with Cook and drew maps of where all these things were all around in the Pacific. That's oral history that he knew. And Cook was really, really interested in that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that helped him in some ways, in some of the places that he went. So now we're going to talk a little bit. Good, we got a little bit of time, and I think I mentioned we covered what you talked about. So all these subjects I'm talking about are so interesting, intriguing subjects, and you get these little tidbits, here and there, little tidbits if you're always looking. And I love that. I like to find things, and that's just one more thing of seeking, looking for arrowheads when I was a little boy in the fields or something like that. Always seeking. I like that kind of stuff. So now we're going to talk about sharks, shark lore, and how they caught sharks. Well, that's interesting. How many of you heard me tell about this before? Anybody? Oh, okay. So, let me look at my note here for a minute. What did I say? Color right here. Okay, good. Okay, so one thing is the niuhi. Now, if you look at Beckwith, Hawaiian Medicine Book, and other things, you'll see that niuhi is a tiger shark. I think it even says that in the dictionary. Awenohui, that's not the niuhi. And I'll tell you why it's not the niuhi. The Hawaiians were really terrified of the niuhi shark. They caught great white sharks sometimes, which we can clearly see from their tools and weapons. They got the teeth. So why were they so afraid of the niuhi? The great white is the only shark that will put its head up out of the water to look at its prey. It'll come up, beside an iceberg and look, to see it. Well, maybe not. That's the orcas, but it will come up out of the water by a boat or something and see if it's something. If that boat's like an island with prey on it, like us, they can see that. So at nighttime, the Hawaiians that were fishing at night were scared to death if they'd see the green eyes of the niuhi. Well, if the shark's under the water, you can't see any green eyes. It's when your torch that you're night fishing with gleams off the eye of the niuhi when it raises up out of the water. They were scared to death and get the heck out of there. And they were used to tiger sharks all the time, because the niuhi, the great white, is a deep water shark. It doesn't come inland very much, but sometimes it does, as we know, sometimes, certain times. So they were afraid of that. They'd keep a real smooth, hard ipu, or more than one in their canoe, so they could throw it out, and the shark would keep trying to bite this thing, and the teeth would keep popping it out of, they'd keep jumping ahead of the shark and hopefully keep it busy a little while they get the heck out of there. So they're scared of that niuhi, and because of that characteristic and the ferocity of the niuhi compared to the tiger shark, I think that's undoubtedly what the niuhi one that they were really, really scared of. So when they were surfing in the old times, everybody could surf, chiefs and commoners, and when it just the surf's up, everybody went out there, men and women, kids, everybody, that when they came back, they didn't ask what they asked today. How was the waves? They asked, were there any sharks? That term tells you they were real scared of sharks and biting them, and so now and then, Hawaiians would lose an arm or a leg or something and survive that. They found a few iwi like that amputated limbs where the person survived, and that probably was from shark attack. So they were sure afraid of that. The difference today, which is not so different now, but it was 50 years ago, was way back then there were tons of honu, there were seals and things around. The Hawaiians weren't seal hunters, but there was a lot more food, there was a lot more fish around, there was a lot more smaller sharks around, and the big sharks would eat the smaller sharks. So they had a lot more things to eat besides people. But now when we've got a lot more honus, now we're getting more sharks. And it seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like we're getting more attacks. I guess we'd have to look at the record and see how many tourists compared to how many attacked to see if that's true or not. But they had the same, the same fear of them, but they also caught them. So how did they catch them? So first of all, they made shark hooks, just like we would do. And it had two unique features. This is a facsimile I made. And it really would be probably a little shorter than this and a little bit more incurved like this. So when you pulled on this, it would pull this point right straight in. I just made this out of, I don't know what. It's not a ohia. But they would make this out of kauai wood or ohia. They'd tie a root of either one of those trees where it would bend around, or in the case of kauai, which is a relative of koa but has a nice hard wood, they'd make paddles and weapons and things out of it. It's great carving wood, tough stuff. So the kauai tree has really gnarly branches. They just grow all around like this, and if you look at a whole grove of them, every once in a while you'll see a branch that's just got that perfect curvature, and that's what you want. You want the grain going right around the curve, because if you use a regular board, you got the grain right here, it's very, very weak, and a shark could easily break that off. But if you've got a root that you tied and let it grow, or a branch that you tied and let it grow, or a natural branch from kauai that comes around in an actual curve, they've got one shark hook, I think, in Bishop Museum, comes down here, angles over this way, comes down here, angles over this way. It's really wild looking thing, but it's unbelievably strong because it's all the grain. It doesn't matter that it's got some angles as long as it gets around to here. So then they figured out how to put this in here, to carve out a hollow to put this whalebone piece right in here, and to make this little niche in here to where you could tie it with olana. And we'll talk about olana cordage. So all of this, this is never going to lose its point. Doesn't matter how many times it's poking at the shark's mouth or anything, it's not going to lose its point. And it's perfectly fixed in place by this mortising here and here. It's very unique. This is Hawaiian unique thing. So is this. The snood up here, instead of having a knob or a ring like everybody else's hooks would have, it has 3 or 4 cut rings like this, yeah? So they get a whole bunch of olana, we'll talk about that. The olana fibers, long fibers, that all hang down this way and tie it real tight 3 times or 4 times with the olana wrap. Now it's really, really on there. Then you turn it over this way and you tie it again. It is really, really, really on there. Olana doesn't rot. It's incredibly strong. And then they'd even weave a sort of an armor over that, but weaving, warps and wefts of olana to make an armored coating over this till it got further up here and became an 8-ply braid that then went on up and hooked onto their other line. So both of those things, this method, so there's nothing the shark can get a hold of. You just got this smooth finish going off of here into the line. And this are both unique to Hawaii. So what did they use for baits? Just something like a big ahu or anything else. There were a few really, really bad chiefs that would use human flesh. They were very much reviled, but there was some platter that some woman had in her collection, had a little puka in the bottom, and supposedly they'd put human flesh there and let the oil or the juices drift out into the water and attract a shark that way. So today we go, hoo-hoo, awe no ho'e. they're really bad. But somebody like that was considered really bad by the people back then, but they had a lot of power. They could do what they wanted. And so that platter's still around probably in Bishop Museum somewhere. But I don't think that was at all common. Now what about the shark as Aumakua? So the shark's not Aumakua to everybody, like a lot of people think today. We know. The shark is Aumakua to the people where that's your ancestral guardian, just like the Pueo or the Io or the Alaiula or any of the numerous other things that could be Aumakua formed like that. Those people are not going to eat shark. Those people are not going to kill a shark. They're not going to use shark things. So as an example, Keho and I, her kumu was choline Ayu. That's I go again with my modern stuff. Mikey, Ayu's daughter. So that was Keho's kumu for a while, and I was craftsman for the halau. So one time we get a call, 5 o'clock in the morning, Saturday. Luckily we were very sober. 5 o'clock in the morning, you need to go up to Haleiwa. They just got a shark. I've been waiting for years to get the skin. You need to go up there and get that belly skin for me because I want it. Niki, one of my hamana. But a shark was her Aumakua, so at least in her family line, it was okay for her to have it. She just couldn't go get it. But she'd been asking people for years, if you ever get a shark, I really want to get the skin. So the traditional covering for the pahu heiau and the pahu hula is shark skin, the belly skin. And what she was telling us that somebody had finally brought one in because the fishermen either don't want a shark on their boat at all because the scent will get on their stuff and the fish smell that and they don't have anything to do with the shark. Or they cut open the belly to see what's in the belly and ruin the belly as far as making things out of it with Hawaiian style. So up we went. It was an 11-foot tiger and it had eaten a turtle, so it was kind of burping up some of this turtle. You could see a honu had been its meal. And somebody had already taken the teeth, already cut the teeth out of the jaw. So there were lots of people there. And I'm telling you this because I think it's leading up to some important factor. So all these people, looking at this great big shark hanging up there, and here we come, they don't know us. And I just explained who we were, why we're there. And they were very, very respectful. I went over and told the Mano who we were, why we're there. We were sent to come and get your skin. And so I commenced to get the belly skin. And I've skinned a lot of things. I had skinned every imaginable animal and an alligator up to that point. And that was by far the hardest thing I ever tried to skin. That skin is unbelievably hard to cut. I had the best modern knives and my sharpening stones and stuff. Unbelievably hard to cut through. And the flesh underneath is just attached to every fiber of that skin. It's not like a deer where you just skin the skin off of the muscles. No. Every little bit of the muscles is all attached to the skin. It just took forever to get that off. So now you've got the white belly skin. I'm just digressing a little bit. You've got the part up here, you've got the whitest part of the belly, and you've got the part back here toward the vent. So you've got 3 circular areas there. And she kept the middle one for her haumana, and she gave me the one up here and the smaller one up here and the smaller one back here. So the smaller one back here is on her pahuhula, and then the smallest piece up here is on my lapaiki, which is another subject. That's not a hula drum. Again, ask me that question later. I don't think that's a hula drum at all. But anyway, what you do then, just as an aside, you've got to get this raw skin and not put any salt on it. If you put a salt on it like they would have done for fish or for any kind of hide, like a boar hide or something they were somehow trying to cure, you don't want any salt on there because every time it gets moist, the drum head is going to get soft. It's going to collect water. So you've got to cure it with something else. So borax works real good. It's a very good powdered borax. Works real good as a preservative and also a poisoning against bugs. So you tack it out real good and you scrape it real good, get all the flesh off, put the borax on it, let it dry, and now you've got a really good, long-lasting something you can put on the pahu. And so that's what her pahu hula is like. Now, trying to think what else about the skin. I thought what I just told you about her with her family beliefs, like some people, they wouldn't want anything to do, especially in the old times. Shark is your amakua. They're going to take care of you. They're going to protect you against other sharks. You know, they might help you if you were drowning out in the ocean. But in her case, it was okay for her to have somebody else go get it and bring it back for the purposes of the people. So she had me teach them about how to take care of the skin, all that, and then it went back to the hala where she's going to use it to make her drum. So what about this other one that we've got up here? This one is just interesting here because that's also a shark hook. So it's got a hook like a modern hook, like this, you know, with the, this one doesn't have a barb. You notice that? Doesn't have a barb. This one does. So we could arguably say that was for a great big ulua or something like that. It could be. But see how it's done up here? It's done the same way like the shark hook with the armor over it. You don't need that for an ulua. So it's whalebone. They weren't whale hunters like the Maoris were. They would just get whalebone and whale teeth from places like right here. Because we got the northeast current coming down to this peninsula, Kualoa. And so they wash up on places like this. So the chief that owned Kualoa in the old times was always a very wealthy chief because this stuff was like gold in the old times. The whalebone to make things like this out of, and then especially the teeth to make the palawa and the wrist ornaments and things like that. So this would be olana, you know, all made of little coating. This isn't quite as well woven as some of the things I've seen. But you know what we were talking about. Think how long it took to make many drill holes and then work out all this bone here, shape this down, because it was probably a rib about this thick, and end up with this in the old times. And they were doing this kind of thing before they had metal tools. They knew how to do all these things.
Is that how that was made? They drill hole the template and then chip it out?
Yeah, so we know from smaller fish hooks of bone of how to do that. I've got a plate that I made, you know, that shows a series of taking a piece of bone, dressing it down, and then making the first initial little bore holes, and then bore some more from both sides. Take away some of the material until you begin to get a puka that you can start to get coral files, and then eventually sea urchin files. Get in there and file the rest of the fish hook. So that's how they did that. Yeah. Removal. One of the ways to remove is just do a whole lot of drilling, and I have no doubt that that's what they were doing here. You know, just drill until they can knock that piece out of there, and then go on from there. So now how about catching the sharks? The tiger sharks we know from all the weaponry, you know, that's the hook that's got the hook, instead of a great white tooth that comes up like this, a perfect pyramid, the tiger shark tooth curves over like this, drops in a little bit, and then has a lesser curve going on down. Very distinctive. Only shark that looks like that. So all of our weapons that you commonly see, tools, your shark's tooth knives are all the tiger shark teeth. So we should talk about that while I digress here for a minute. How you're going to get those teeth and have a big good teeth that lasts a long time. And nowadays you buy them, right? You can order 12 teeth, 20 teeth, whatever you want. Certain size, by a quarter of an inch, you're going to pay a certain amount of money. The shark, as you probably know, has a ton of teeth in this jaw. It's a cartilage, not a bone jaw. And they've got all these rows and rows of teeth. Only the ones that are out being in use are the fully matured teeth. All the ones behind that are the next row, the next row, the next row, the next row, with less and less and less maturity. So the ones with lesser maturity will have a less developed base, and they're not as hard, and the enamel part of the main part of the tooth isn't stuck to the base as good. So if you're ever buying shark's teeth and you want to use it for weapon or anything like that, you want the teeth that have the fully intact base. It goes down like this, arcs up a little bit, comes back up again. That's really, really well attached. It's hard to tell that. because if they're a little younger, that last little curve on the tooth is the thinnest part, that last little curve that has a small little teeth on it, small little bumps. That's very prone to coming off. Very prone to coming off. If you get shark's teeth, get some real good, fine, thin sound acrylate glue, and go around and put a little bit of glue on that last little cusp that goes off, and even the other side too, a little bit of glue. Because they always boil the living daylights out of them. You know, they're beautiful white, they're going to make pendants, right? They're beautiful white. They boiled the living daylights out of that thing to get it real clean like that. So it boils off the good connections between the base and the tooth, and it's very prone to want to come off. So if you get the ones that got the full base on the bottom, nice full solid base on the bottom, and you'll see what I mean if you look at a bunch of teeth. Some will have just a partial base, or the base isn't so long. That's what you put the pins through or put the lacing through when you make a weapon or a shark's tooth knife. So did a little bit of modern cyanoacrylate and did glue right along the bottom where the enamel part of the tooth hits the bony base, so that it won't later come apart. I just know this all from sad experience. So if you're getting the teeth, if you're lucky enough to get a shark's jaw, which is really tough to do here in Hawaii, if you get a shark's jaw like that and you're boiling it, you want to boil it just enough where you can get the teeth loose from the jaw. You know, you may have to clean a little bit of the cartilage off and stuff, but don't boil it any more than you absolutely have to get those teeth loose from the jaw. Step one. They won't be so white. They'll have a little more color, just like all the old ones that you see in the museum. They'll have a little bit more creamy color instead of that dead white color. Be a lot better tooth than a mature tooth. So the other thing too, I'm sure they did was bury it. Just bury it for a long time and let all the cartilage stuff melt away. And you'll have a really good tooth that way too. I've never done that. I've just done this slow, gentle boiling. So that's a little bit about the teeth. Now what about the other ways to catch the shark? They had the hook, as you'd expect, right? The hook. And they had another really curious way, and I always thought this was just crazy, you know, crazy, nutsy stuff. If they're in a canoe and they could lure the shark near the canoe, you think, well, how could they do that? But in Micronesia, they have a big loop of a sapling, and they got all these pieces of coconut shell on it, and they rattle that in the water to attract a shark. It makes a noise like an injured fish or something, I guess. So Hawaiians probably had something like that too. Something, or they'd always go to a certain place and whack on the side of their canoe with a certain rhythm with their paddle or something. Somehow they get the shark coming up by their canoe. They got a noose and a bunch of rope in the canoe, and the canoe, for just a few people, a couple of fishermen or things, not that big, get the shark up beside the canoe, and then they would reach over with their foot and put their foot on the shark. So that sounds like a crazy way to get bitten, you know. But nowadays, if you look at from Australia and things, when they got the great whites coming out of the water, like I said, you know, they'll come up behind the back of the boat or something right out of the water and look at the people in the boat. If somebody's bold and puts their hand right on their nose, it just mesmerizes. This big great white, just like drunk, just mesmerized. And apparently the super powerful electromagnetic stuff they've got on the front part of their head to detect prey is affected by our very mild electromagnetic radiation that they're not used to, and it just kind of freaks out their nervous system or something. And the great white's just kind of mesmerized while somebody's got their hand right on the end of its nose. And so it probably is like that. You know, it's probably the same kind of situation with the story with the Hawaiians. So now they got their foot on the shark, right? And then they get down to the point where they can put their, no wait, they start with their hand first, right over the side of the canoe, and then they replace it with their foot. So now they get down and they got both hands free, and they get the noose, you know. Now they got to get the noose, and they take their foot away and they put their cheek on the shark to replace their foot, and they slip the noose over the head of the shark back to the gills, you know, where the fin comes out. But they always do it with their hands like this. It's in Malo or something. They always turn their hands so the dark part of their hand is going by the shark's eyes, so it won't instinctively snap at this bright thing going past their eyes. Finesse, yeah, but that's what they supposedly did. And then they jerk the noose tight and whew, they're going to go all over the place until the shark is finally tired out. But if you can tow a shark backwards, they have to swim forward to get water through their gills. You can tow them backwards, you'll drown them, and that's where you get them. Or maybe they got them so weak they could spear it. But from my experience with the skinning, you'd have to have a heck of a good spear to spear a shark. It just doesn't want to go through that super tough hide. So that was the way, and as I say, I thought that was absolutely crazy until I saw those more modern videos where the great whites even were mesmerized by the human touch. So it seemed to have some validity. And then the other way they did was they get a whole flotilla of canoes, probably big sailing canoes, double-hull canoes, take a whole lot of foodstuffs, bundles of foodstuffs, and go way out in the ocean to some current that they knew about from generations of experience, where great whites would be more likely to be, out in the open ocean. They're really an open ocean shark that doesn't come inshore much. Tigers do a lot. So they would throw this stuff in the water. You just want some kind of scent. It's like a dead whale floating in the water, and the sharks eventually all find it. That's because they have unbelievable, they can smell just billionths of a particle or something in the water and trace that scent to a food source. So once the great white would finally come after a few days or a week or however long it took, they would throw bundles of fermented food into the water and the shark would eat that. And I thought, they're trying to make the shark drunk? I don't think that would work. What I think they were doing was they were throwing the fermented stuff, the shark would eat it, that would ferment more in their stomach and they'd get a lot of gas in there and it would keep them up near the surface where they were more likely to be able to lasso them. So Herb Connie made a beautiful drawing of a double-hulled, chiefly type canoe, and they're just going over a great white with the noose right in the front, and it's just about to swim into the noose, because then with the sailing canoe, and if they can fight that thing all over the place until they can start towing it backwards, then they're going to kill it and get it all the way back to the shore, and the rest is history. Because that pahu heiau, you know, the big pahu heiau in Bishop Museum with some teeth stuck in it, that's got to be. That's either an enormous tiger shark or it's a great white belly because it's such a big top. So her pahuhula is 12.5 inches diameter at the top, and that the rearward part of the belly skin was just right for 12.5 inch diameter pahuhula, but the average that we got from measuring all the ones we could find in the books and things was 14.5 inch and 18.5 inch high for pahuhula with at least 2 decorative patterns on the bottom. That's just a little detail I'll throw in there. So that was about right. So the pahu heiau is so big, I really think it has to be the belly of a great white to make that one. And while we're on the subject, what about the the bowls that they had with the human teeth stuck in them? Or that drum with human teeth stuck in it? So modern thinking, you know, this is a defiling thing, and it's human bones or human teeth, and it's all burial stuff, and of course it wasn't in old Hawaii. But those teeth, that was either honorific or it was defiling. Same with kahili handles, the bones and the kahili handles, sometimes the leg bones, either honorific or defiling. So it could be either way. The ipuaina is a slop basin. That's like a chamber pot or to spit in. You put somebody's teeth in there. Every time you do that, you're insulting that chief where the bones, the teeth came from, and their whole family. I'll tell you a little story as an aside. All these little tidbits that I really like. I've got to think of the name of this chief. So Umi's brother, Hakau. His brother was Hakau. He was a really evil chief. He was the son of Lilo in Waipio. Took over from him, and Umi was off going all around. He was the illegitimate child, right? And eventually came back and became the chief, but they killed Hakau because he was a really evil chief. He probably had some kind of deformity because of the beautiful woman or a beautiful tattooed person, he would have their limb cut off that had the tattoos, or the breast cut off the woman that was so beautiful. Evil, evil person. So people really wanted to get rid of him. So some people say those ka-eyes, do you remember the ka-eyes, those torso-like forms that are woven that had the skull and the long bones inside? There was 2 ka-eyes that disappeared from Bishop Museum way back early 90s. So that was said to be Liloa himself and his son, Lonely Kamakahiki, his great-grandson, Lonely Kamakahiki. And so, I'm trying to think what I would, oh, I know what it was. So some people say one of those ka-eyes was Hakau, this evil, evil chief that Umi and the priest killed. Oh, that was Hakau. And I said, oh, not a chance in the world he would have been deified and made into a ka-eye. So how do we know that it absolutely was not him? There's an idiom in Hawaiian when they were doing the rat shooting, they had fairly weak bows with little featherless arrows, and they would shoot at the eoles in a little enclosure that was a li'i sport. That's the only thing they used a bow and arrow for. There's an idiom that says, strike, O Hakau, strike the rat in the head. Bingo. They put bone points on the front of those arrows. They're talking about his bones being used on the front of the rat shooting arrows. So when you say strike, O Hakau, that's what they did with his bones. They made the point of rat shooting arrows out of that jerk's bones. So with little teeny clues and little teeny bits of oral history, just that one little thing about rat shooting tells you what really happened to Hakau's bones, and they're not in a ka-eye. We kind of digressed there a little bit. So, let's see, we covered the great whites and all that. So, okay, we got time. Let's have a few questions and then we'll eat lunch. Anything, any subject, whatever.
The shark belly is the only part that's salvageable for other uses.
I think the reason they use that is because it's thinner skin here. Sharks often have a lot of bites and things on them, especially the females from other sharks at mating time, biting, making scars and things. But the belly underneath is thinner skin, and it's white, so it looks really nice on the pahu. And I think because it's a thinner skin, therefore more flexible, a little more easy to fit it to the top of the pahu. That's why the belly skin. It's just like other animals, they always know, whichever people who use those always know what's the best use for the certain parts of the skin here and there. But that's.
So what was your success on cleaning the skin, that thin part of the skin?
How hard is it? When we were skinning, if I was getting past the white over into the gray part over here, it still seemed to be the same way, but I didn't skin it enough to see if it had even more attachments of the muscles underneath to the skin, but even the belly was just totally, totally attached to all the little ripply muscles.
What tools did you use?
And the what?
What tools did you use?
I had really, really good modern steel knives, really good stuff, and sharpening stones with me, and it was the toughest thing I ever skinned. I had a hard time just getting through the skin. And for them to do that with whatever they had very, very little obsidian, volcanic glass, it's super, super sharp. Hawaiians had very little obsidian. I saw a few little bits of it one time in Lanai, deer hunting after a real heavy rain. I don't know where they came from. And then Pulava on the big island on the Kona side has a lot of obsidian right there, but it's very crude obsidian. It's not real good stuff. But if you get really good obsidian, it's super sharp. A broken glass is the sharpest thing you can get. It just breaks clear down to one molecule. That would be really good. It wouldn't last very long, but it'd be really good to cut something really tough like shark skin. And it also works for pearl shell, if you're trying to cut a groove in pearl shell and break up blanks to make a fish hook. That's one thing I found that would cut the pearl shell pretty good. Just keep trying to slowly cut it with an edge of obsidian. So good question. So, you can just wind me up, push the button, and the stories will just keep going on and on and on. So I congratulate all of you that your ears aren't so sore they're plugged up already. But I really, really appreciate the opportunity to tell you some of these things, because a lot of these things I wouldn't tell to most groups, but I think all of you could handle just about anything I would say. And so I really appreciate that, because some of these things that have happened with people I know or to me, are really strange things, you know. If I was in a psychiatric ward, somebody was telling me all this stuff, I'd be writing my little thing out. He said this and this and this. But that's, I want you to think about it, and I want you to pass it on, whatever you feel like passing on. And that I'm really grateful. That's why I'm so grateful to be here. So the last talk is a touchy subject. What about Hawaiian burial practices? In today's world, this has really gotten to be a kapu kind of situation with some people with their protocols and things, which I deeply respect. But I also would like to remind everyone, I've been here through the entire cultural renaissance, from when it was practically nothing to where it got going all the way along here for 50 years. And the protocols are virtually all new things. Now, not Lua, not like that, but a lot of other things with a lot of different parts of Hawaiian culture protocol. So they're valid, but they're not linear from the past. So as I've told some of the young people, if you want to create a protocol for something, for tapa or restoration or something else, you've got every right to do it. You don't have to look at these people a generation older than you that know the protocols, because they were created by a need from the Hawaiian Renaissance. Lots and lots of them. They become perfected, they become used, they become valid. But if you create one based on what you know and what you've researched and what you feel, what you feel, it's valid. It's valid. Just because you're 17 doesn't mean it's valid. If you did your homework and you know what you're doing and you know your subject and you create a protocol, go ahead. So the burial customs and practices, as I said, varied all over the place between different families and different things. Basically, from what we know, as far as what I know anyway, the ali'i practices became vastly more complex and important than any of the commoner practices, and I think that was true with cultures all over the world. The chiefly people were considered more important, they had more goods, they had more relationship to the god, interacting with the gods, or more power from their personal endeavors, and therefore they had more important practices. So here, the key thing about it is mana. Mana. So the chiefs had all this mana that the commoners didn't have. They might achieve mana by catching a shark, giving it to the chief, or extreme bravery in action, save the chief's life or something. They might even be elevated to a low level of ali'i for some extreme act of bravery or service. But basically the commoners weren't related to the gods like the chiefs were. The chiefs aren't just chiefly people, they're related to the gods. So they've got a lot more mana. And then you achieve more mana as you go on through life, the things that you do. Kamehameha, all the things that he did, all the management he did, all his powers, all his ability in war, all his akamai. He has a lot of mana. So from a Hawaiian cosmologic point of view, if you're going to make a fish hook, the biggest mammal in Hawaii is a human. Right? They don't have anything bigger than a pig. Humans have some real strong bones, especially if they've been athletic all their life. So this bone right down here, the flat of your tibia down here, is a flat of some really strong bone, highly sought after to make fish hooks. And if a fisherman is highly successful, then his bones were sought after to make fish hooks. So the commoners weren't very much worried about that, but the chiefs were. You did not want somebody to get a hold of the chief's bones, because if they did defiling things, remember what I said about hakau? Hit Ohaku, hit the rat in the head. You're saying that tip of that arrow is made out of Hakau's bones. So all his relatives, when you're doing that and saying that saying, you're insulting the whole lot of them and saying what happened forever about what happened to Hakau. So the chiefs didn't want that. They didn't want anybody defiling their bones and going, ha, 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 we got the bones and we crushed them all up and threw them in the ocean. We made fish hooks out of them, or we made kahili handles out of them, or whatever. You didn't want that at all. And the people didn't want that either. The despoiling of the bones. And the mana of the chief's bones deposited in the countryside anywhere is the life of the land. That mana is really important. It needs to stay there and maintain the mana of the aina in that area. So that's why the chief's bones were so heavily protected. That's why they're put in the anahuna. That's the impenetrable caves, unreachable caves way up in the Pali somewhere. You can only get to them with extremely difficult trail or by being let down by a rope or something. So that no ordinary person is going to get there and get the chief's bones. So when they had a death of a commoner, they weren't saving particular bones, like the skull and the long bones. That's where most of the mana is. The part of you, like your hair, your long bones, your skull, will last the longest out of a human being. Those are the things that would be most likely to retain the mana and most important to burial practices. So if a commoner passed away, there are several factors that come into play. And one of them is burial methodology. Before the coming of the missionaries who taught people that they should be buried extended, you should take good care of everybody's body because you belong with God and so on. And to be buried in a coffin or a quasi-coffin like a canoe or half of a canoe, etc. That's Christian practices, but before they would frequently bury people, the commoners at least, by trussing them up real tightly. So the body was flex before rigor mortis set in, or once it set in, then after the body relaxed again. That's a stiffening of the body after death. So they would draw the legs up very, very tight, the knees bent, draw the legs very, very tight up to the body, and push the head way, way down between the knees and the arms wrapped down around the legs, and wrap this all up, tie this all up into this small bundle. So it's easier to handle and it's much easier to bury because you don't have to dig such a big hole. So it's a tropical climate. You're going to want to bury people if that's what you're trying to do pretty soon, because very soon things are going to get pretty nasty and pretty smelly. So you got to bury people pretty soon. So if you have ordinary deaths like that amongst commoners, or especially if there's an epidemic, where are you going to bury them? Sand dunes. Vastly easier to dig a hole in a sand dune than anywhere else, especially if a whole bunch of people have died. So everywhere in the sand dunes all over Hawaii, you're going to find burials because it's easy to bury in a sand dune. And if it's been there for a long time, that's a pretty permanent place. Usually the sand dunes don't change except maybe a major hurricane or something. Big major sand dunes will have vegetation on them and so on. So that's one thing. And then you've got the concept of moi pu, putting objects with the dead. We've heard lots about that since the 1980s. Moi pu, moi pu, moi pu. Goods placed with the dead. So what about that? So in the old times, we didn't have the concepts like the Egyptians and Native Americans that they needed to have their slaves with them and they needed to have their pots with them and their food with them and all these things for the afterlife. Not much concept like that, which I'll get to in a little bit, hopefully showing more of that. Until the missionaries came, and then it was vastly more common, just like everywhere else where the Christian religion was, to put things with people, their favorite Bible, their favorite book, their favorite scarf, their favorite something, Civil War relic or whatever it might be. So this moi pu, the concept of lots of goods put with the dead, and that's common, I would propose to you is not true. Because if it was true, Hawaii, as small as it is, would be dug up and look like Peru or the Middle East everywhere. There'd be pits everywhere. People dig it up all the time, everywhere, trying to find relics with the burials, which are everywhere, like I said. Every sand dune would be dug up and so on, and it's not. So as soon as you get to the Christian era, then you start having the moi pu. In the dictionary, this is telling, in the Pukui Albert Dictionary, that marvelous thing that we've got, thank God, is vastly complete. All the different meanings and things. So the term moi pu'u is in there, all the first 7 editions of the dictionary, moi pu'u, which means a person that goes to death with the chief or the chiefess, moi pu'u. The shortened term moi pu, which came to mean putting things with the dead, doesn't come in until that term got to be being used a good bit from the mid-1980s on, and in the last edition of the dictionary is the first time you see the term moi pu printed in there. It is not in any of the prior editions. So a lot of things have been overlaid into the culture in modern times for various reasons that I question. So there certainly were things. I mean, Sam told me one time that on, over on the Kohala side. Now this is like near the lower road that goes down from Kamoela towards Kauai, that some pilot saw some capes or something out near a cave he thought was being aired out. And Sam went to try to find those, and he never could. He couldn't get in there, but I thought that was remarkable, real remarkable. And then Sam Lono, I don't think I talked to you guys about that. That was another group. He was the last of the fully trained kahuna. He lived in Haiku over in Kaneohe side. He had a little bit of land in the back, and in the back behind his very small little house, no electricity, was supposedly a heiau to all the four major gods. Just his own private heiau. Really spooky back there, his Alaka'i told me. And nobody could stand to go back there with him. I said, I'll go back there with you. I would love to go back there with him. But anyway, during an evening with Sam Lono, as I say, the last of the fully trained for 30 years kahunas in Hawaii in the 20th century, he was the last one alive. So I went there one time with his nephew for a reason. He wanted to check me out, let's put it that way, and see what my motives were for some offer of help. And so his nephew, his wife, and their son, and me were there, and everybody left, and we just got more and more and more peely together until we could just ask him anything. It was the coolest night of my life, the most memorable night of my life. And at one point, he told us he went to the Big Island to train with his grandfather for the end part of his training. And at one point, his grandfather took him to a heiau, and he prayed on the heiau for 3 nights. They were there 2 days and 3 nights. And his pule essentially was, we're coming with a proper reason, let us in, which suggests to me, of course, there were some major curses about this whole thing. And finally they went, and they saw all this amazing stuff. So I said, somebody said that must be the cave of Kamehameha. It must be a whole lot of goods and things that were hidden away of his thing. And he did speak of canoe hulls and capes and things. And I'll share with this because I think it's very interesting what this man that was so incredibly heavily trained. And his son had told me he can be really fierce if he goes off about Howleys or something, just ignore it. But it wasn't like that at all. We were just having an absolute ohana session, and it was awesome. So the woman, the mother, was a Filipino woman, and she says to him, when he's telling about all these incredible things, well, would you ever take something from someplace like that? Very innocent question, right? I'm expecting him to go straight up and smoke. I'll preface this by saying at one point, she said something about stones. Well, aren't you afraid about the stones? You know, all the superstitions about you can't take stones from Hawaii. He blew up like crazy. I've got stones from every hail on this island, in these islands in this house. You don't see anything happen to me, do you? I mean, he was really ticked off about that modern superstition. So here we are at this point, 10 o'clock at night maybe, and she asked him this question, and I'm just waiting for the blow up. You know what he said? Yes. You could have knocked me off my chair with a feather. I'm not kidding. You could have knocked me off of my chair. And he went on to say, you could take a cape from a place like that if you wanted to, but you're the kahu. And then he said, and don't sell it. I swear flames shot out of his eyes when he said that. So he said, the keeper, now you're going to be the keeper. Maybe there's no more keeper. The keeper died 100 years ago. You're going to take something and malama that thing. Now you're the kahu. So what he was saying, a totally different manao of things today. People would say, oh, you could never take something like that. And he was saying, you're the kahu. I think that's important when we're talking about the cosmology too, because here again you've got all the concept of mana within Hawaiian thinking, and the fact that in the old times all these familial caves had a kahu, a hereditary kahu. Usually would be the hiapu, the oldest from the family, who went there at least annually, and as Somebody told me long ago, often there'd be a little rock or some little opening where you could squeeze in and get in there and take care of things and then seal it back up again. So these kahu, all these caves were cared for by somebody who knew where they were. Maybe not everybody in the family, but somebody did, and he took care of them. And so in the 19th century, what happened? So many people died. So many people died. So tons and tons of kahus died. And all of these things with all this mana that might have survived for centuries, such as those ka'ais, no more the kahu. Nobody's caring for them. No more aloha, no nothing. No more malama. They're just there. And then somebody comes who cares and who wants to care for them and malama them. Then from a Hawaiian cosmologic sense, I would say they're really, really glad to see you. They're really, really glad that somebody that cares came to see them and malama them and take care of them and clean them and so on. So that's a whole different philosophy than a lot of people today. So I don't believe from the people that taught me, my Hanai mom and him, were not afraid of burial caves. I do not think if you go there with pono purpose to learn and care for, that you are defiled. I don't think you're defiled at all. I think that if you believe in Hawaiian cosmological principles and the Aumakua and things, they know you. I say if you go and say in Hawaiian terms, I'm so-and-so, I'm here to do so-and-so, there's nothing heavy about that at all. You're not defiled. It's not at the time of death. You're doing a very good pono thing. You don't have to go clean yourself for doing a good pono thing. But now, kalamai, that's just me, and I'm sure some of you have been taught quite differently, which I much respect, but I'm just sharing my own thoughts from some of these people whose mana'o and training goes way back, way, way back. So I think that's an interesting concept too. So what we've got today is trying to understand that the things of the past. There were kahus when they were living. If somebody discovered the family cave, or say a dozer ran over the cave and it fell in, like when they were making the airport at Kailua, and here's a cave, it's got some things in it, belongs to some family. Everything was gone by the next morning, so obviously there was a kahu. Somebody heard about this, and somebody went and moved all those things away by the next morning. But in many, many, many other cases, there isn't any kahu. And if you found it and you just kept quiet and you took care of it and looked after it, now you adopted the position of the kahu. And I don't personally think that you're defiled in any way by doing that. I don't think the Aumakua think you're defiled, and I don't think that they think you're defiled. And I wouldn't feel defiled. So I'm speaking very freely because of this audience, very freely. And I very much realize that some of you have heard things probably very different from that. I respect that. I'm just sharing with you my mana'o from people whose knowledge and feelings reached far back into the past. And other things just from my own experience and how I've felt. So now we get to other questions about at Mokapu. How we doing? We're doing good. At Mokapu here, where the Marine Corps station is, Mokapu, there was huge sand dunes. I've never really been out there. But in the late 40s, it was starting to be developed, and they were doing more things there with the military stuff. They were starting to bulldoze things up and change things. And people realized there was a lot of iwi in those dunes. So they did what's called salvage archaeology. They got volunteers, at least one of the people was pretty good archaeologist. So they got as many of these iwi as they could, and in the mindset of those times, they were able to analyze a lot of those iwi. Now that wouldn't fly today at all, right? Not in the slightest. But it's a book by Snow, and very, very erudite book. It has a lot of photographs and things, but the important things within that were things that they were able to learn dentally, was very interesting, with the bones. So a couple of things they learned from many, many burials was there was one area where burials had been dug up and the longbows smashed to get the bones for purposes, and the rest of it thrown back in the grave and covered up again. Now, In today's world, that would just be a heinous sin, right? So obviously the people who did that, that wasn't their relatives, and who knows who it was in their terminology from the past. Maybe they're people that knew that area that were always told, this is some people here from long ago, and nothing to do with us, you know, they're not our ohana. They found that the men and women, they died on average very young. Women like 27, men 29, something like that. But that's on average, because you get a lot of keikis and things that die young. But they were very strong. You could tell on the bones where the muscles and ligaments attach how strong somebody was, you know, how thick and strong the bones are and all the attachments for the muscles. Both the men and the women were very strong. So they're all doing laborious things all their life. And there were very few injuries. So there were very few. There wasn't a bunch of domestic violence, and there wasn't a bunch of violence between the people of these people. Like 1,100 burials, I think it was, 1,100 burials. And out of 1,100 burials, they found one little ornament, if I remember it correctly, one little ornament, a little bitty crude palawa out of 1,100 burials. So the terms today about waipu and so on, that doesn't fit at all with the idea. They used waipu in old time. So the other thing that was truly astonishing was that several of the skulls were shaped skulls, like the ones in Peru where they bind up the head and the head gets flattened here and has this big extension back this way. Several of the skulls were shaped skulls, like Peruvian skulls. That was another thing for my idea about maybe Peruvians got here. Because that's a mind blower in Hawaii. There's nothing like that that I know of that is talking about any significant amount of skull shaping. It is plain as day in those skulls. They're not totally elaborate like some of the ones in Peru, but of course the most elaborate ones are the ones that end up in the museum. But they're absolutely, unquestionably, those shaped kind of skulls. So who was that? I can't think of any other particular thing about disease things. I don't remember if they found any especially disease things. I just don't think they found much in the way of healed fractures and things. They just found that the people died pretty young. They were both really strong, and there were very few injuries, and also very, very few burial objects. So that was real interesting. Now, what about the Anahuna? These are the caves that are way up in the cliffs somewhere. There's a famous area in Maui. There's one here, I think. This place, the caves up here, was a famous burial place, too, for Li'i. So those are the ones where the chief's bones are very carefully tucked away. They don't want anybody messing with them. They don't want anybody getting them. And so the mana of those chiefs is going to last for centuries there. And those things will last for us. Hair will last a long time. Skull will last pretty good. Long bones will last a long, long time. So how did they get the long bones of the chiefs to bundle them up in tapa and put them away in a cave like this, or some of the ones that I know about on the Big Island, for instance? So they did that with a ceremony called kapalau. Does anybody know what is kapalau? Kapalau ceremony? So if a chief died, and I'm sure this happened with Kamehameha and hundreds of other ones, they had a process where instead of being wrapped up in kapa, like the burial ordinarily would be, they wrapped them up in leaves, hence kapalau. The wrap was leaves. Big leaves, no doubt, like banana leaves, maybe taro leaves, ape leaves, things like that. They would bury the figure in probably sandy soil, shallow, and they'd build a series of small fires all down the trench where the body was. They would tend that all the time, day and night, and they probably would chant the whole time. That would be my guess. They're chanting something the whole time. And how long, I don't know. But what they're doing is slow making that body so that all the tissues will fall off. And just as you like with the sharks do. Slow, you don't have to boil very hard, just slow, slow. Eventually all the tissues just start softening, coming off. And eventually they're all going to be able to come off very easily. And if you've ever had turkey bones or something and you've been making a soup and you've boiled it for a long, long, long time, you just pull the bone out and it's just clean, right? Everything has fallen off of it. Or it's easy to scrape off. All the small bones, all the other tissues and everything else are gathered up, carried out and put out at sea. Buried at sea or buried way deep, but probably out at sea if they're near the sea, so that nobody could get a hold of any of that. Now they've got just the long bones and possibly the skull. The wife does that and other close relatives. They do this cleaning of the bones. Then they're wrapped up carefully in tapa. And what have you got? If you've only got the long bones, which was common, or possibly the skull and the long bones, you've got a package about this long, about this big. So you've got the long bones here and the long bones here. And however tall the person was determines how long the package is, but maybe about that long, right? And about this big around if it's just the long bones, right? Or if the skull, then it's going to be a little bigger with the skull at one end. And the tapa is very likely to be much better than just ordinary tapa. And it's easy to conceal, it's easy to carry, it's very lightweight. You could go out, you don't even tell anybody the chief died. You do all this secretly. You get the bones, you put it under a kihei, you go out of town to go to the Anahuna or wherever else you're going to hide these bones, and nobody knows. Nobody knows a thing about it. Whereas if you're carrying a body out on a big pole or something like that, everybody knows, wala'au. So that's why the burial caves where there's a whole lot of burial bundles, like Kanupa Cave on the Big Island, Bobby Cave in Honokoa on the Big Island, and others. These are regular land caves that have a lot of burial bundles in them, which I would suggest are their lesser level ali'is than the really high ali'is that are in the Anahuna way up in the cliffs. Just my mana'o, probably. So those bones are expected to last a long, long time. And what about hair? Hair will last a long time too. So what about the Niho Palawa? All this hair, has that got something to do with a burial? That's an important concept today. I've seen them taken out of Mission Museum because somebody's saying that's some kind of burial hair or something. That's not burial hair. But that's where things have gotten to it today. But what was that hair? Well, women in old times, as you can see from Choris's drawings and others, their hair is very short. They've got some bleaching up here with coral lime. They'd even put color in it sometimes. They're the first punkers. They'd even color it sometimes. But it's very short, and that was typical, supposedly, when they got married. But people really didn't get married back then in the sense that we have. And I think it more likely was when they had their first child. That would be my suggestion. They cut their long hair that they've been growing ever since they were young. So if it's an ali'i line, they're going to save all that hair. And it's going to take a lot of hair to make a lady Palawa. So I believe this is the hair of ali'i line women that's been saved for a long time, 8-ply braided into those fine, fine little braids. And so that's a mana of the family. That's a huge amount of mana in this thing that both chiefs and chiefesses alike wore with the ivory form here, which obviously is a symbol of something important because it doesn't change. The little ones and the big ones are all pretty much alike. That's an important symbol of something important. And I propose, and others have too, that that's a high foreheaded image, and the teeth and the tongue, which is real important in images, is very much pronounced. The face is much subdued. That's just the upper part of the Palawa curve inside here where it's curved in. Then you've got the forehead part here, and you've got all the hair coming out here on the sides where the hair would be, right on the head here, all in a bundle attached. So this is representative of the ali'i's position and a symbol of a ki'i, kind of a face. And maybe that shape, when you turn it over the other way, it looks like a human tongue. Maybe that's a secondary symbolism of the ali'i's ability to do the ceremonies, talk with the gods, and so on, that the commoners weren't given that kind of belief system. So the Leiniho Palawa, one time Bishop Museum's recovery department had one all apart, and somebody I wanted to talk to was busy, so I went and got to look at it. They were taking it apart, and I could count how many strands. It's an 8-ply braid. It's unbelievably hard to braid hair into a small little 8-ply braid. The best braid was on the outside. The coarser braid was on the inside. It's 2 great big loops that come down, and then there's a cord between them in the hole in the palawa. The hair as it goes through that hole, just a bunch of olana holding it together there. And then they bring it up bit by bit, and slowly, less and less, until they finally get the last little bit, tie a cord around it, and the olana pieces then go up and become the 8-ply braid. That's the tie that goes around the back. So there was about 96 hairs in a braid, and there was about 1,900 feet of braid. And I once got my daughter, my mother, and my grandmother's hair, and I started braiding it. That's about the only project I gave up completely. It was just totally out of the question. So I think it took a bunch of people in the family months, if not years, to do all that work to make one Niho Palawa. That's why they're so very valuable. So I would say insistently that that's not got anything to do with hair cut off of bodies as a burial situation. It's all hair taken off of the women when they cut their hair short, and it carried the mana of the family line, and they're wearing it as that. So the caves up in the hills, in the cliffs on Ahuna, are just difficult ones. We walked down Honokoa Gulch one time from the upper road all the way down to the bottom, which is 5 miles. And I remember looking at the cliff wall at one place about halfway down, and I could see a door. There was actually a wood door you could see on that cave hole on the other side of the poly there. And the only possible way would be to come down with ropes. So they had made that and installed that on there, and you could see it from our side. You could sure see it, but nobody would ever be able to get to it unless they knew exactly where to go from somebody's help on this side or perfect markers on the other side to be able to get down to that and then put people in there. But I know of another cave in Honokoa where there's another gulch that comes down to meets Honokoa Gulch. It's a big gulch just north of Kaihai. It's where Forbes Cave is, this famous cave where they found all these incredible artifacts back in 1905 or 6. But anyway, we saw that walking all the way down there, as I said. And, the other one. So the other gulch that comes in, it meets it somewhere up there, not too far up from that meeting place. There's another burial cave there that's an open one. And a man that I knew who knew all those lands and was a rancher up there was out with his hunting dogs one time, and he was looking for one of his dogs, and he just happened to find the opening of that cave. And he said there was a woman in there in a rocking chair. So obviously that's, post old times far more likely to be, and probably in a dress too. But that's just, the different customs that different people had. Sam told me about one cave where they had coins on the eyes, and that would be a Christian type of thing where, you put coins on the eyes so that the eyes can't open up, during a funeral service or something, which they occasionally do. Well, those are all just little tidbits that shows the thinking of the people and the concepts. And then Sam also told me that in Kohala, he was the expert of South Kohala. He was born up in Kahoua, up high up. That's where his tutu lady raised him up. But he said back in the 30s, on all the lands are terraced, terrace. You fly over it, you see terraces, but they're all torn down. They're not really clear. You can't really use them for much for agriculture. He said they get two big dozers and a great big ship's hawser chain, a great big ship's chain, go up and down the mountain, just mowing down all those walls, and that's why they're all in disarray from just taking them down for ranching. So today we're just abhorred, but this is oral history from him, from there. But what he told me too was that there were a good number of above ground burials, which I hadn't heard before. Making some kind of a ahu, some kind of mound, and have above ground burials. He said there was a goodly number of those. I know there was something like that that's written in the Journal of William Ellis, I think, down by Kailua Kona. What's the name? Kuomo, the valley, the last battle after the battle of over whether or not they would overthrow the Kapu system. There are a lot of platform burials there too. It's well known for that sort of thing. But again, Sam said there were quite a few of those up there in Kohala, and that they just mowed them all down. And they just went down with the walls, all that stuff too. So just trying to share things I can think about with you from other aspects of the islands here and there. But I thought the most striking thing was that my family on Kauai is from high-end Lono line priesthood, the kahuna. She was a very high end. And so Sam Hook's tutu lady, this old lady that probably had hot-eyed him when she was about 100 years old, was also of high-end Lono line. She was of the line of the two twins that buried Kamehameha's bones, that put Kamehameha's bones away. She was of one of those lines, and I'll tell you another story in a minute about that. So both of them raised old way from people whose knowledge were deep into the culture. Neither one of them had any fear of burial caves. They had no fear of telling us about burial caves. They had no fear of us going there if we were going for a Pono reason. And even if we were going to film something like these giant canoe hulls that were in one of them that Sam knew about, because he knows us, and he knows we have a Pono mind. We're going there to learn, not to destroy or sell anything. We're strictly there to malama and learn. So he had no fear about telling us, and neither did my Hawaiian mama on Kauai, not in the slightest. It's quite different mana'o than a lot of things today. So I say that because here they're coming from highly learned lines of Lono line, kahuna lines. And this was their mana'o. So I said something to Scotty earlier. Once upon a time I talked to Sam, and he was not a teacher. You just had to be at the right time, driving somewhere in the car, or he just get in his mind to just say something, and you better be listening, because then you'll never hear it again. He'd never say, now sit down, I want to tell you about so-and-so. Not like that at all. He's not a teacher, but he told me some mind-boggling things. And one time I was talking to him, probably alone late at night, and I said, Sam, I'm like a warrior. I'm not afraid of anything. I'll just go anywhere. I'm not afraid. I'll just go. I want to learn. That's always been me my whole life. How will I know if I'm not doing the right thing? Did I say this to you guys earlier, or was it the people on Kauai? No? Did say this before? He said 2 words. You'll know. That's all he said. You will know. And once upon a time we went someplace where I really was called to go. I went with some other people. And I don't want to tell you the whole story, but suffice it to say, I was just driven to go find this place. I didn't know why. And when we went with some other people, and one of them was a friend who was very, very into Hawaiian things, very well known. But his wife was with him, and she was Native American and heavy duty into her previous culture. And his daughter, 13 years old, was with us too. And so we finally found this place with the help of a rancher that I knew. And so I said to them, let me go see what it's like. And I started in here in my street clothes, and it was like the cross sticks. I had never, ever experienced anything like that. It wasn't just a little bit, it was like, don't even think about coming in here. I was just stunned, absolutely stunned. So I came out and I told them, oh, it's real dusty and dirty and rough. We're in our street clothes. I don't want to upset his wife and his daughter. We should come back another time. So we did, and then I kept getting called again to go back, and we went back all the way from Oahu over there. You're expecting the same thing to happen? It was exactly the opposite. 180 degrees, exactly the opposite. It was just wonderful, one of the most beautiful experiences of our life. It was just like, aloha mai, and I'm so glad to see you, and it just enveloped us in this whole feeling of aloha, and we spent a long time in there. And that was really, really a memorable experience, but what I just said to you is absolute exact truth of what happened. So yeah, I knew that one time, I sure did know. I sure did get a real loud, don't even think about coming in here. And yet the call to come back again, when it was just her and me, it was a whole different ballgame. So as we were just talking back there, I'm very, very much different man than when I grew up. I grew up in Ohio, a very nice family and things. But my whole outlook about life, about cosmology, about Almacoa, everything is so different and so much deeper. And I don't understand it very well, but it's sure been quite a trip. Quite a trip. So I wanted to share with you here, we got a few more minutes, a couple of things. If I had time, I wanted to say this to you. I just ran across this very recently, and this is from February 11th, 1932, some book, obviously. And I think this is good about the Hawaiian cosmology. So it reads as this. The other day I met an old Hawaiian gentleman and asked him about the way in which the dependent poor in ancient Hawaii were cared for. He looked at me astonishingly and said, "Aohe he poe ili huni ikawa kahiko, he poe pala walelo valino." There were no poor people in the old days, there were only the lazy. This statement about sums up the attitude of the Hawaiians toward old age and dependency. So remember we're talking about cosmology, Hawaiian belief system. Before the introduction of modern civilization, the family was a controlling factor in the social makeup of the people. Like the idea of filial piety, familial piety, among the Chinese, the Hawaiians took care of their aged. The old people made themselves useful around the grass house, repairing calabashes, preparing lauhala, and finally weaving them into the moena mat. Today, the Hawaiian kuleana, the family grant of land, is no longer available to the Hawaiian, so he becomes independent as he migrates into the city, into the home of the aged, or into the households of friends. There is no longer the little patches of uwala, kalo, ko, and uhi for the Hawaiians to care for and thus busy himself. Agriculture and aquaculture no longer attract the Hawaiian farmer and fisherman. According to the Hawaiian, life is made up of 14 stages as follows. Kahana ana, birth. Kahuli ana, turning. Kapupu'u ana, curling. Ku ana, standing. So they're describing the positions of infancy. Ka'iana, stage when a child has to be led. Heliana, walking. Wa'opio, youth. Kaho kanaka, manhood. Keoana, maturity. Ka'emiana, declining. Elimakule, old age. Kaniko'o, the stage when a stick is necessary to keep from falling. Kolo pupu, to crawl, an aged infirm person. And hamakaiole, stage when the eyes are dim, the steps totter, and the breath is short. What that means is eyes like a rat. So a man is said to reach the stage known as hamakaiole, like it means like I would just say the mistiness, the junk or something in the rat eye, in the Hawaiian rat eye. When he is sold, his eyes become so small that he is not able to see more than 10 feet ahead of him. 2 years ago, an old gentleman by the name Kafiana Nui Moku Kai Aikai, and 99 years of age, was brought to Honolulu from Kona. This old man was then in his last stage. He was quite strong, as he was able to do the hula with agility and skill. Among the ancient Hawaiians, then, the ages were respected and cared for by the younger members of society, so that old age dependency and indigent homes were unknown. And what is more, homes for the ages would be considered disgraceful to the family in ancient Hawaii. And the other one is kapu of ancient Hawaii. I thought this was real interesting. I'll read you these kapus. A man and his wife had separate imu. A man had to cook the food for his wife in a separate imu from his own. Women were forbidden to eat pork, bananas, coconuts, and certain fishes, i.e. ulua, kumu, shark, sea turtle, porpoise, and whales. So we know the men ate shark because the women were forbidden to eat it. If a man, by the way, the ea, the hawksbill turtle, was, I just read recently, considered poisonous for some reason. They didn't eat that. They ate the honu, the green turtle. If a man entered the elite's house without changing his wet malo, or with his head smeared with mud, he was put to death. When a tabu chief ate, the people in his presence must kneel, and if anyone raised his knee from the ground, he was put to death. If any man put forth in a kioloa, a long, elegant, swift canoe used for display and for racing, at the same time as the tabu chief, the penalty was death. I would say all three of those had had a relationship to the potential for assassination. That's why they were not allowed. And sometimes they had to take off their kihei if the chief came by. You can't have any weapons hiding under your kihei. You have to take it off. During the Makahiki, war was forbidden. Even among relatives, there was a skin kapu, which forbids the wearing of each other's clothing unless the relationship was very close. So the closer the garment was to the human body, where all the mana was, the more imbued with mana it was, and the more kapu it was. So if it was something of very much an outer garment, your close relative could use it, but something like your malo, even your close relative probably couldn't use that. During the dedication ceremony of a temple, a luakini, no noise could be made, not even a baby's cry or any animal's sounds. Remember what I meant? People would cover up the chickens with a cover. They would tie the dog's mouth shut. I don't know what they did with their babies, but there couldn't be a sound of any kind. That was really a no-no during the very, very sacred ceremonies. Upon the death of a king, kapa was declared for a period of 10 or more days during which no contact with the house of the deceased or with relatives living in the house could be made. Remember what I told you about liho liho and things? When canoes of royalty were being made, specific to the lashing of the outrigger, to climb into the canoe or to intrude in any way at the time the lashings were done was to bring down on one the punishment of death. And again, I would say there's a possibility of sabotage there. There's a possibility of attempted assassination. There's a possibility of trying to do something to make the coup come apart in a bad sea or something. So that became a very sacred, protected thing, that lashing of the canoes of the chief. If a god of one fisherman placed a taboo on everything that was black, the fisherman accordingly would not allow anything colored black in what he wore. His wife would not put on top of that had black in it, nor have anything black about his house. So that becomes into belief systems where you've had a dream or you believe that the god told you something, perhaps in a way of clairvoyance that we mostly don't have the capability to do, but they would hear this and believe this became a kapu for them and their families. A piece of land containing a temple or a tree to be carved for a temple image were kapu. When a chief wanted to reserve offshore fish and waters for his own use, he declared a temporary kapu on the section of the ocean involved. All the land inside a walled compound where the high chief lived was kapu. Tells us two things. They had a walled compound, not just a house. This kapu extended out from the walls 40 yards and no commoner crossed the boundary. So what's a yard? An iwilei. Iwilei is this. See, your iwi could make a lei, that's an iwilei. This is an anana, which is essentially a fathom. So they could measure yards more or less like us. And they like to measure in fours, you know. 4, the 40, the 400, the 4,000, the 40,000 gods. Only relatives were allowed to remain in the house of a dead person. Ceremonies were performed for the dead, and after burial, the relatives went through a ceremony of purification. Remember what I said? That's the defiling period. They're the ones that are handling the body, trussing up the body, or doing whatever they needed to do, and burying it, and cleaning up everything. Then this is a defilement period, and yes, then you need to go heal by and whatever other rituals are necessary to purify you after that exposure. The beef, cattle, and geese, I never knew about the geese, new stocks of sheep and goats which Vancouver brought in 1794 were placed under kapu for 10 years. That caused terrible consternation because all those cattle got really wild up on Mauna Kea and things that were just, they would gore people. They were very much feared, but nobody could do anything. And that's where a lot of the stone walls got built, to keep those cattle and things out of their yards and their growing places when this kapu was in place. If a child accidentally wet a chief, that child was killed. So, you're not really sure, because you know how a kid will just pee any old time. So chiefs didn't want to do it. They didn't want to hold a child because if something like that happened, the child might be killed. And so it was very tricky. And so I remember in one instance, the child, something happened, and the chiefess just immediately adopted the child. Now it's her child, they can't kill it, of course. Men and women ate their food separately in separate houses. The 6-month tabu was enforced alternatively between opelu and aku fishing. Some women of Ali'i blood were so kapu that they could not rear children, not even their own. Should they attempt to rear children, the children died, or became crippled, it was believed. So these kapus that you inherited, sometimes by conjoined genealogy from both your mother and father's side, it just got heavier and heavier and heavier stuff. And the kapu, you know, some people were so kapu that their shadow fell on anything they owned it. Your house, or you, or anything, any other object. So they would only go out at night. Some of them even only on the really dark nights because they were afraid their shadow would fall on some people. And there were others like this. But like I say, there wasn't a whole lot of in-between, like 3 days in jail or, you know, write your name on the blackboard 100 times stuff. There was, you broke the kapus, you got axed. You may have become a human sacrifice. So now we've got about 5 minutes, or longer if you like, for questions. And any subject, anything, have at it.
I've got one. How do you think it can be described? It's not sitting right with me that with the good bones, the good teeth, no skeletal problems, that the lifespan centuries ago was only 30 years when everything points at them being very healthy and very strong.
Yeah.
So is it maybe like...
Well, apparently
that kahuna, like,
there was just apparently enough possibility of accidents, and way back then, apparently these were pretty old burials. It wasn't like they were getting terrible diseases and things. It's just that when the average age was 27, women 29 for the age. So many keikis, you know, what do we do today? To this very day, despite all the Western medicine and everything, we celebrate the first birth. The first anniversary of a baby's birth is a big deal. And many cultures do that, because if a baby makes it to year 1, they got a lot better chance of living on after that. That first year is super vulnerable for multiple reasons.
yeah.
So we still celebrate that first year, right? That's a big deal. People save up all their money for that luau, for the first anniversary of the child's birth. So that's what it is. It's the average age of death that they computed from those people from looking at them. They could kind of tell, you know, whether it's a male or a female. Well, they pretty well can tell, and then they can pretty well tell how old they are by changes in the skull, where the joined parts of the skull bones, where they become fully joined together more and more, how old the person is.
Because I've just heard from many sources, so many that show that they're very strong, healthy, lack of disease, lack of problem people.
Yeah.
30 years
Life was
a long
tough.
time ago for me.
Well, it wasn't all just fun and games, you know. Now think about this. They had periods of famine. I mean, the chants are full of ole, you know, give us food, keep us well fed, take care of us, maintain our life, let us have a long life. Because sometimes there was a famine. It wasn't just a war, there was a famine where they just had a period of drought, or especially a hurricane. Or imagine if you had a hurricane like our Uniki hurricane or something, and then people were recovering a little bit, starting to build houses with the meager resources still left around, a little bit of land and food available, and another hurricane hits. Oh man, I mean, people would just die. There's nothing to eat. They would go up in the mountains and eat tea roots and other roots and anything they could get their hands on in those famine times. So when you hear about infanticide, to us, you know, oh, geez, I mean, why do they kill the little babies? But when times were really tough, in times of war, or in times of famine like this, then that's where infanticides would happen, because it's so bad that the mother knows, if I keep trying to nurse this little baby that I just had, I'm liable to die, and all the other kids are going to die too. And so things that we think are heinous were sometimes done because of absolute horrific circumstances, or wartime, things like that. So now we're going to talk about the difficult thing to talk about, and that is overview of Hawaiian cosmology. In other words, what was the whole worldview of old-time Hawaii? So we can get a touch of that, we can get a glimpse into that, but there's tons of things like that. In the writings of Mary Kavenapukui and things like that, we see tidbits, at least from her lineage and early life in Ka'u on the Big Island, which she readily says it was Ka'u, doesn't mean necessarily every place else. So that would be the first thing that I would talk about, is Today we speak of Hawaiian culture. Maybe I said that this morning too. Hawaiian culture like this, all over the world. It's in the books, it's at the university, everything, Hawaiian culture. But in the old times, this is an island archipelago here. It's separated. It's a long ways from Oahu to Kauai. You can't see it over there. It's 90 miles across there. You can look from Waipio and see Hana Maui to a degree. You can see Maui over there on a good day. They could see that, but in a lot of cases, they were separated by ocean and the currents and the winds and the rains and the seasons and all sorts of things. And so the people in all the different levels of the land, and they named everything, all the levels of the ocean, all the levels of the land, all the way up, all had their name, their section. The places all had their names. The boulders had their names. The cliffs had their names. The pools had their names. The sections of the sea had their names. Iniwahapana, a famous place, had its name. Everybody knew that. They didn't have our maps. They had the names. And everybody had an unbelievable memory. So as soon as you mentioned this name or a wind or something in a chant or a story or anything else, everybody knew where that was. You might not have physically ever been there, but they knew where that was. So that was the locator, not our map. Names, an incredible memory. So the differences in these places was legion because they had been long ago settled by different people with different observations from what little we know. And probably there were several waves of people, occasionally some foreigners, like I mentioned, that came and brought different ideas. So different islands, different ahupua'a, different ili within that ahupua'a, different villages, different families within that area, all had somewhat different beliefs. They prayed to different gods. They had somewhat different ceremonies. They had somewhat different kapus or within their family, their own kapus. So there wasn't any singular Hawaiian culture. There was a lot of variation. So when someone in the book here, this wonderful book that Alika brought, is talking about my family's history from so-and-so, incredibly important. The things that are written down in Hawaiian and transcribed to us through the incredibly detailed stories that were written in serial fashion in the Hawaiian newspapers in the later 1800s are unbelievably valuable. But what it doesn't mean is that somebody on another island or another place didn't think differently, because maybe they did. So like I said, some people might have felt that if a shark was their amakua, like her kumu, no way she could have anything to do with a shark. She didn't want anything to be around, no shark thing around her, use a shark thing, absolutely no. But within her family, it was okay for her to ask us to go get the shark and bring it for her hamana and teach her hamana how to use that. So we always have to keep those things in mind when we see these writings, because let's look at the cosmology just of the 19th century alone, 1800s alone. So 1819, Kamehameha dies. May of 1819, he dies. He's a staunch supporter of the old-time religion. He'd been talked to many times in Vancouver. He'd seen Cook when he first came. And he'd had many experiences with people trying to convince him, one, to make allegiance, particularly with England, and two, to accept Christian-type religion. He would not. He really believed in the old-time ceremonies. He was heavily steeped in those things. And so it remained as it was with the kapu system all the time he was alive. So in May of 1819, he dies. Now, lihu has to go away. That's another important thing. So there's a time after death where things are really kapu. The close relative like lihu who's going to take his place needs to go away. So he went up north on the Big Island to the grove, which is right below Pukohala, actually. That was where his family compound was. That's where they would go to relax and things, just down there. So he had to go up there, stay up there probably at least 10 days during this period of unrest, defilement, whatever you want to call it. The spirit may still be around. In the case of Elias, it might be even longer. Probably at least 10 days, he could not be around there where this death had occurred, because he's going to be doing important ceremonial things and he doesn't want to be contaminated by this period. So the people that are taking care of Kamehameha, taking care of the house where he died, which would be very, very kapu at that time, defiled, so to speak, from the death, and anything to do with his goods, everything, those people had to be kept away from other people. They were, whatever we want to call it in our terms, they were different. They were sanctified. They were defiled. Pick your term. In our terms, they're defiled by the death. In their terms, it's a different picture. But everything's kapakahi. Everything's turned around. So, as an aside, it used to be in the kapu system very, 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 very strict. But when some high chief died, everything was out the window. It just threw the whole cosmos into such consternation that people just did any crazy thing they wanted to do. Freely have sex anywhere, wherever, run around naked, break all the kapus, do whatever they wanted, just everybody running wild doing crazy, crazy stuff. Kamehameha didn't want that. He said, I don't want you to do that, don't want you to do that when I die. I don't want any sacrifices, anything like that. But nonetheless, he died. The Hawaiians by that time knew a lot of things from the presence of foreigners. For instance, the women had seen foreign women eating with the men and nothing's happening. They undoubtedly had heard from sailors, Tahitian sailors on the ships, that the kapu system in Tahiti had been overthrown, like 30 years before that or something. The missionaries went sooner to Tahiti than they did to Hawaii. So nothing happened. So they would have known that. They were very unhappy with the kapu against eating with the men. The women could never eat with the men. Men had to prepare the food. Period. That's just the way it was. And so Liho came back from this defilement period, and he supposedly really liked rum, so he may have been imbibing quite a bit of that up at their family compound and on the ship coming back and everything. But long story short, when he came back ashore, Keupualani, the very sacred wife of Kamehameha, Liho's mother and two of the other Kamehamehas, and Kahumanu talked him into, or whatever, sitting down with them to eat. Whew. Everybody saw that, the sky didn't fall in. That was like, wow, that's unbelievable. You just broke the kapu system horribly right in front of all of us as you, the new king. And that was the beginning of the end of the kapu system. And so, Heva the high priest, that means you've learned all the different levels of kahuna practices and know them all, and you become the high priest, had spent enough time seeing what was happening with the future and how life was changing and more contact with the outside world. So he went along with this, to my huge surprise. He went along with this. They're going to throw out the kapu system. So they did, and I'm saying all this to help you understand what it was like before and during this turmoil period and after, that many things happened in Hawaii that are unbelievable. Unbelievable things. So this was one to me that was utterly unbelievable, because the Hawaiians then threw out their entire socio-religious system. They knocked down the heiaus, they threw out the priests, they burned the images. It would be like today, somebody comes along and says, why don't we just do away with all the ministers and priests and all the paraphernalia in the churches, and the churches too, by the way, all the icons, all the Bibles, let's just get rid of it all and start afresh. Do you think that would fly anywhere in the world today? You think that people would do that? It's mind-boggling to me. But they did. They did. And so Heva went along with this, and of course there were people who objected to this, like Liho's cousin, Gekua Kamani, is that his name? Huh? He objected to that, and they had a big battle at Kuamo'u, and he lost, of course. Why? Because Liho would have had all these zillions of muskets and small cannons and things that he inherited from Kamehameha, and the other side couldn't possibly have that many guns and things at that time. And they had one more last little skirmish down halfway between Honoka'a and Waimea, and that was it. By October, some say December of that year, 1819, it was all over. It was like whole Hawaiian society was awash. And then later, the next year, here comes the missionaries. They've been at sea for 7 months. They got no idea what's going on in Hawaii. They don't even know if they'll be allowed ashore, let alone be allowed to have a church or anything. And they walk into this. And so Liho talked about it and discussed it with his chiefs and things, and decided they'd let them come ashore for a year as a trial, but they couldn't mess in the politics or anything, which they did. So I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but this is a really, really important episode in Hawaiian history because I've never heard of another society that ever did such a thing. You know, just threw out their whole social religious system and sort of destroyed and burned everything, and then we're sort of in limbo for a while. And then a new strict religion came along with a whole bunch of kapus, and you can't dress this way, and you got to do this, and can't work on Sunday, and you got to go to the services, and all this stuff, to a society that was extremely used to all that strict stuff. So that's what happened for a long time. But let's go back and look at more of the old-time history and the way they thought of as the world and the cosmos and so on. So you had the site of the sunrise as the east, the site of the sunset as the west, and then you had the north and the south, and you had the zenith, and you had the horizon. These were all named places. They're in the chants and so on. So they would orient things in that fashion, and then they had all the layers of the land. And so I'll just read them because I never can remember them all. But if we start way up high, 5,000 feet and up above the rainforest, that's called Wau'akua, place of the gods. So that was a sort of a wilderness, a wild place. That's the kind of place that ordinary people were afraid of. There's lots of spirits and things up there. You know, if you go up there, you better pule, you better mind your manners. That's where you get the rules about in hula, you know, don't pick on the way up, pick on the way out, do your pules and so on. Then you've got the Wau'nahele, or Wau'la'au, from about 4,000 feet. The fern forest, that's where you got canoe timber. And things come down some more. You've got the Wau'ama'u, or Kanaka, that's 3,000 feet. That's forest taro and wild bananas. So the Wau means a place or a level. And so they're naming each, this is Ama'u, that's the area of the Ama'u fern. Wau'ilima, now that's the lower level down where you're starting to have more weeds and things. You've got Ilima with the beautiful little orange flowers. That's wetland taro, 2,000 feet elevation, Wauke, yams, olana, and pia. Then you've got Kula Uka, and that's the upper lowlands, the Kula, the more flat lands, yeah? 1,000 feet. Dryland taro, sweet potatoes, gourds, sugarcane, pandanus, and lastly, Kulakai. That's here, 500 feet elevation where they've got the coconuts and the coconut trees. And then you've got all the levels in the heavens too. They had all the levels, you know, from right here and then a little bit over your head and a little higher up and up, and then more and more. All of this realm here above the horizon was also named off in layers, certain areas where gods and people and things were thought to be. So this, I'll just tell you this real quick. So we've got triple heaven of the Hawaiians. They've got the Pa'ilalo, that's the one down here fairly near the surface, the Leva, all the in-between, and then way the high heavens, Pa'iluna. And let's see. Well, this is just, you know, if you're thinking directions, then you face to the west, the ancestral land. Akau, the right hand, that's north, and Hema to the south is your left hand. And Kahikina is where the sun comes up, that's the east. And then Komohana, where the sun goes down, that's the west. So everything was oriented, everything was named, and the people who were more knowledgeable, especially the priests and things, would intimately know all the characteristics of all these things that I just described to you, all these different areas. Down in the South Seas, they had really elaborate, you know, all these different levels of the heavens and the different things and people and whatnot were on all these levels. Had some sort of drawings like that I've seen. So to say that it was complex is an understatement. So What about families? Different families had different akua that they prayed to. Different professions, like the medical profession, the healers, that's Lono. That's the Lono line. And then you've got the Ku line, and that's mostly the husbandmen. The people had trades were under the god Ku. There were myriads of names of Ku. Ku this, Ku that, Ku this, Ku that, Ku this, Ku that. So those people were praying to Ku. Kani was a creator god, and he and Kanaloa, the ocean god, these are the four major gods, of course, would go around in the earliest times, and Kani would find springs or create springs with the help of Kanaloa. So when the missionaries came, they have the trilogy, right, plus the devil. So poor Kanaloa ended up being the devil, and the other three ended up being like the trilogy, helping people to understand Christianity in Hawaiian terms, so to speak. So in different places and in different families, you had lots of variation in what was their favorite god to pray to. And the commoners would have some little thing to pray to, or fishermen, maybe just a little effigy, even a rock that they had carried along in their family line or something. And then others had images, and that would be kept within the halimua. That's the men's house of a kauhali. That's seven little houses altogether, would be somebody wealthy enough to have all seven. But you had the women's house, the common eating house, the halimua for the men, and then you had a cooking house, you had a halipe'a, menstrual hut, and you had a couple of others, 7 altogether. So these would be the people that were a little more affluent, at least, to have that kind of situation. And in the halimua, they had, in the thatch, they would have an akua of some kind, and that would have a gourd, ipu o lono. The ipu o lono would have some ava, some other offerings in it, and the boys would go there when they're about 7 years old and start to wear a malo. So that was strictly for their place and for their eating. But the services would be the hiapo, probably the oldest person in the family there would be doing these services, praying with this ipu o lono every day. So I've always wondered about how did Lono, who's only got one night of the moon, get so much power or position within the Hawaiian cosmology? I think probably because Lono, or Lono, way down south, was probably the major god of those more pastoral people. That's just my suspicion. It was entrenched in the society to the point that even when the Ku and the war god and the kapu system and all those things came into place, Lono still maintained its special position, to the point that he even was the god of makahiki season. So there's another thing that's unique in all the world. Maybe I mentioned that, but think about that now. So every year, even if you're having a terrible war, everybody's scared to death, they're living in shelter caves. War was no quarter. I mean, you could be killed at any time. And so people were scared. They couldn't travel around, they couldn't harvest their crops, they couldn't do all kinds of things during wartime. But when Makahiki came, which was the rising of the Pleiades at sunset, after sunset, when the priests see that constellation showing up for the first time above the horizon, late in the fall, that's the start of Makahiki, right there. And then I've heard other things about there were some ceremonial things that went on for a few days before the actual Makahiki began. But the point being that for about 4 months out of the year, during the rainy season, the early part of the summer season, was the Makahiki. No weapons, no war. Unbelievable. No other society I've ever heard had such a thing. You can't be having a war, everybody's got everything going real good, all of a sudden declare Makahiki and the war's off. Everybody's putting their weapons away and we'll start again in 4 months. Find me another society that ever did any such a thing. Which shows you that the society was very much united behind these deep cosmologic thoughts, these different ideas. Very, 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 very unusual and unbelievably beneficial to society. Because everybody's in high anxiety. When it's wartime, you don't know what's going to happen, or you don't know where the war is going to happen. You see them making war canoes, making weapons. Warriors are gathering. You see bad things are going to happen. Bad, bad things. You better store food, find a good shelter cave, get ready when all hell breaks loose. And all of a sudden, you're free. You can walk the trails, you can go see your relatives on the other side of the island, you can plant, you can harvest, you can make things. you can have parties and do sports and all the things they did during Makahiki. That's unbelievable compared to any other society. It's just simply incredible that they would have such a thing. So these are the things that are unique to Hawaii that I find really, really interesting and kind of hard to understand. So depending on what line you were from, the Lono line, the healer line, right? The time of peace and all that. So Kamehameha, what line was he from? Everybody'd say Ku. He's a great war chief, right? He got a heiau made for the war god Ku at Pukohala. He's high up in the Lono line. That blew me away. His cousin Keua down in the south was supposedly a high priest of the Lono line that knew all of the stuff of the Lono line. And then in our chant class, there's an Oli. The third line says, "O great Kamehameha, you of the royal Lono line." Right there, plain as day. You can't misinterpret the Hawaiian. Whew, that just blew me away. So that gets into some really other curious things. You know, why did he like to do all the ceremonies? Why did he like to do Lono ceremonies? Why did he reinstall a Lono heiau on Lanai and officiate over there? What happened to Pukohala after the overthrow of the Kapu? Overthrow of the Kapu system? No. After the wars ended, then what happened to Pukohala, the Ku heiau? The heiau right below that, Mailekini, old heiau right below Pukohala, pretty well restored now. That's a Lono heiau. It's a Lono heiau. So maybe Kamehameha, after the ends of the wars and things got settled and he had things working pretty good in all the islands, maybe that was converted back into what's called a Luakini Maoli heiau. That's a very obscure term that I only found 10 years ago, maybe. And even in Malo and things, you don't find that term. They're talking about all these processes and ceremonies and things, always in terms of a Luakini heiau, you know, the women's heiau just right outside the walls and all this sort of thing. So those heiaus, where they had Ku priests and Lono priests, are called Luakini Maoli, a true Luakini heiau. Very hard to find that term. So sort of to digress a little bit, when Captain Cook came ashore at Kealakekua, that's Hikiau heiau, it took him up on Hikiau heiau and they paid tribute to some of the images. They went around by the Haleo Lono and feeded him there, since they thought he was Lono, of course. So you've got a Haleo Lono right on Hikiau heiau, and it describes about the Lono priests' houses in the back. So what that means is that in the Makahiki time, the Lono priests are in control. They put up Lono images, take down many of the Ku images, particularly the major one from the prior year. And then when the end of Makahiki, about 4 months later, the Ku priests come back in. The Lono priests are out of control, but they're both in control of that big heiau at a certain time of the year. That's a Luakini Maoli heiau. So Hikiau was a Luakini Maoli heiau, which I had already highly suspected from that, and then I met a man who was a descendant of the Lono priests on that heiau, and he said, yes, it was a Luakini Maoli heiau. Now, Ahuena heiau was his favorite heiau at Kailua. That was Kamehameha's own heiau, and that was converted into a Luakini Maoli heiau from being just a Ku heiau. And Mokini, way up to the north, I read somewhere, was a Luakini Maoli heiau, with both priests at different times of the year. So the last one is Pukohala, the whole line of the west side of the Big Island, and I proposed that it was converted also to a Luakini Maoli heiau after the overthrow, or after the wars were ended. It just made perfect sense where great big major ceremonies to both major gods were conducted, that it would have been converted into that. So there's more reason for that, why I theorized that, but I think that's very likely to be true. So now we've got Kamehameha with his devotion to the old-time services and also to Lono rites as well as the Ku rites that he was very well versed in. So we begin to see that at least within one family, this stuff gets really, really complicated. It's very complicated. The Makahiki, by the way, for whatever it's worth today, when they backtrack astrologically, the astronomers can figure out when things happened at a certain time in the past. when Cook came to Waimea in 1778, the Pleiades rose about November 11th. And then it marches further in time, not back in time as time passes. So Makahiki would probably be starting up, I don't know, I'm guessing, but say November 20th or something, and then extending clear off into February. And the reason I was interested in that is when when Captain Cook came and there was no weapons, nobody was attacking him, and he couldn't believe it. Both times he came in later January, so that fits right in the Makahiki. And then he stayed on, you know, at Kealakekua, and they were getting very tired of him being there. Finally went away, mast broke, came back. All of a sudden everybody's really pissy. They're not treating him like they did before. He couldn't get away with things like before. They steal his cutter off the ship, he puts a kapu, somebody shoots one of the chiefs out in the bay there, the word gets back to this town there. They're trying to get Kaneopu'u to come on his ship like he'd done in other places in the Pacific. They get his cutter back, and the Hawaiians go and get armed and come back, and they get in a big fight, and Captain Cook gets killed, and so does some of the Marines. So he had no idea, I'm sure, that while he was gone, they had okied the Makahiki season and gone back, or at least they were certainly in a transitional time. And he comes back, and there's a whole different attitude, and all of a sudden the people are armed and they're fighting with him, and so on. So all that gets really, really complex. And I'm telling a little brief window, just a little brief window in all these things of the past. So you had the hegemony, the power of different chiefs at different times, like Kahikile on Maui, would be he'd have Maui, and then he'd have Molokai, Lanai, Kahulavi, Lanai, and eventually I think he got hold of Oahu too. And then you had Kamehameha fighting with chiefs and finally getting control of the Big Island, and then conquering Maui, and then slowly working his way to the point he was going to invade Kauai. So lots of things were happening, and as I said, it appears that the population was getting better and better and better at using the land, getting more and more and more things terraced. More and more people could live through famines even, and reproduce, and finally the populations just got so big by the 1400s that they were really fighting and really killing people off with some major fighting. So that's why we have things like shelter caves where people would hide. Some are really curious, there's a cave mouth that's all walled up, and there's one little place where you can go in, and you have to bend over to go in. Then maybe you have to go through a little passageway like this to get on in, and right up here there's a little platform, and there's a guy up there with an ihe, and whoever comes in there, they're just not going to make it. So there's really interesting stuff about some of those wartime shelter caves. So let me take a little look at my note here for a second. Okay, we talked about that, and so let's talk a little about Mapele. Those are shrines. Those are not the fancy walled heiaus, that were brought along with Pa'ao, but just shrines for here and there. So the inland ones were the ones to Lono. And then that would be offerings like pigs, dogs, maybe chickens, certain agricultural things and plants, but certainly not a human sacrifice. The Luakini heiaus are the big, multi-step, multi-level walled heiaus with the human sacrifices. So let's talk about that for a minute. I think that's kind of interesting. Why were they doing human sacrifices and putting up on the lele, which is a platform where you put the offering? So the highest offering from those big heiaus was a really big black pig. And in terms of Hawaiian language, that's wa'ahiva. That means a pure black, sacred kind of pure black pig. So that was highly valued. So a wa'ahiva was caught and kept in a pen for purposes like this. I mean, if you had one of those to give to the chief for a ceremony, that was an important gift. But that implies there's other colors of pigs, right? If there's a wa'ahiva, there's got to be at least one other color of pig. So they had names for all different kinds of colors of pigs with spots on their jowls and reddish flanks and white feet and spots and all sorts of things. And so I'm kind of an aside, but the people who say, all these ones at Malka, you know, with the white feet and the spots on their sides and the reddish gels and everything are foreign pigs and we get to kill them all? Aoli. Those may very well be the Hawaiian pigs of the past, which are absolute icons. Highest level thing you could put on a heiau as a black pig, except for a human being. So that, you know, that's an icon that they're freely killing up there, and you can tell the foreign pigs here because their head comes down and then drops down by their eyes and then comes out, and their nose is shorter, and their tusks are smoother. They'll come out of the jaw easier. The old-time Hawaiian pigs have a lot of little teeny ridges along their tusk, and it's extremely hard to get it out of the jaw. You just about have to break the jaw to get them out of the jaw. So those are little tidbits. So Pa'ahiva, a really big one, a great big one on the lele, here and here with a human sacrifice, face down on the lele with one arm over like this, was the ultimate. That's the ultimate sacrifice. There, so this to us, you know, gross, crazy stuff, and they singed the pigs. So that's probably where we hear about burnt offerings and things in Hawaii. You know, they probably singed the human. Why would they do that? Because they want it to last longer on the lele. If you singe the body, you close up all the pores, you kill off all the bacteria on the surface, the body's going to last longer on the lele, and that's what you want. They leave them up there till they just rotted, because they want, if the gods come by, to see that they're making these important sacrifices to them. What's the most important sacrifice there is? What's the biggest mammal in Hawaii? Us. Biggest sacrifice you can make as a human. So to them, they're sacrificing somebody who's a criminal. They've broken the kapu laws, or they've done something actually criminal. You know, some bad robber or something like that. But the kapu system was so strict that, you know, it just, in a very major ceremony, you just raised your hand, you got a cramp or something, you could be killed for that, you know. Or you accidentally got within chief's compound and didn't realize that you could be killed for that, and then various other things too. So when you got that human sacrifice up there, which to us is like cruelty, meanness, murder, etc., in Hawaiian cosmology, you're saying to the gods, our relationship with you, which we pray to you and you help us, and we can reject you if we want, kind of a mutual benefit society. We know that this person broke all these kapus. In biblical terms, it would be the covenants with God, right? They broke all these kapus. We have killed this person and we put them on the lele, so you can see how much we respect our whole kapu system. And we realize this person broke the kapus. That's an affront to you. We don't want you to think the rest of us think that's okay. And we have killed them and put them on the lele for a long time for you to see. That's a whole different line of thinking than today's, oh my God, how could they do human sacrifice? People don't even want to talk about it, you know, at school and things. Oh, you don't want to talk about human sacrifice. So I like that kind of example to help us get ourselves back in that old times and thinking like old time people with their cosmology. Why did they do certain things? So as far as devoutness, the commoners and lots of other people like Kamehameha, they're praying every day. They're praying all the time for all kinds of stuff that they do. Every time they do something, they're praying to their personal god, their family god, or something. The kahunas all have the god or gods that they're praying to. So Pule was very, very common in the old times amongst everybody. And I'm quite sure that just like us, there were some people that were very atheistic who just didn't give a darn, and others were incredibly devout and just praying constantly, and a lot of people in between. So let me think what else I can say about the cosmology. I think what I said before, to say that it was complex would be the understatement of the year. So children, as they grew up, they saw all these things going on around them all the time. They learned all these ways of behavior just like we do, you know. Tell the little child, you can't do that, the cop is going to come and get you, you can't do that, you know. So what am I going to say? Another one really interesting thing about this. whole situation. So what about the halipe'a? Now that's a real good one. Do you guys know what the halipe'a is? The menstrual hut where the women went during their period? Right. So they were kapu then. They had to go off in this little hut and stay there, ostracized from the other people. And some women would come, bring them some old tapas to act as their menstrual pad and take away any rubbish and feed them during this whole time. Then afterwards they would have to go hiuvai or in some other way purify themselves after their period. So we go, how abusive, they're treating the women really bad. Remember what I said about think about it the old time way? So blood is defiling. You can't get any blood on your hula instruments, you can't sit on your hula instruments, and the sacrifice has to be not bloody. No. It can't be have cuts or blood on it or anything. The sacrifice has to be really pure with no blood. So blood is defiling, but blood is the life's blood of people. They know perfectly well that living people have pumping blood and the dead people don't. That's a life force thing there. Who's the people in the society who reproduce the next generation? The women. Who are the ones not allowed to eat the stuff that is used in the ceremonies on the heiau? The women. Right? Who has to go away the halipe'a during their period? The women. So I propose that in those days it was because the women were considered powerful and therefore fearful in a way by the men. They had to make sure that they didn't touch any of their weapons or their canoe or anything like this with this menstrual blood that had to do with life, with the whole cycle of life. So I ran across something a year or two ago I thought was very, very telling. When Keua was coming across the volcanic fields in retreat, I think, with hundreds of his followers down by the volcano, and the volcano was going off. It killed a lot of the people. So they had a person at the back of the line and the front of the line of all these people trying to get through a clear spot in the lava. And you know who it was? A woman on her menstrual period with a flag on to mark that fact was guarding the front and the back of the whole line of people. And I say, bingo. That's a perfect argument for what I'm saying. That there was a lot of power involved with this for the women. And they had a unique characteristic that the men didn't have, that the men feared. So the things in our mana'o, we go, our way, that's just, mean stuff to do. You look back at it in those times, it reverses your thinking entirely. I like that kind of, that's my mana'o. Some would disagree with me, but I think it all fits. So let's see what else I can tell you about the cosmology. The gods are the leap year thought to be, the stars up in the sky. They're up in the sky. Always refer to Kalani, so and so Kalani, a chiefly term of the heavens, right? But what about the Leina, the leaping off place, at least one on every island where the spirits would go and leap off into the sea and go to Po, sometimes called Milu. Very hard to differentiate those things in old-time writings. But some kind of a place that's sort of a limbo. It's not a Hades, it's not bad, but they're eating spiders and moths and wandering around in this very dark place. And occasionally in the oral history, in the chants and mythology, somebody would be able to go down to Po, you ever read that, and rescue somebody and bring them back from Po. I don't ever hear of anybody going Ikalani and rescuing, but out of Po, yes, they did. So that's a real interesting concept. So the Leina is a leaping off place. Every island had at least one. There's one on this island at, what is it? Kaena Point. I've been on that. It's a mound of rock that's sticking up right there. So if the spirit could get there and leap off into the sea, they could get to Po. So you wanted, when you died, to have been a good person and respected your aumakua and prayed to them and so your aumakua would find your spirit after your death and help you get to the Leina so you could get to Po. Otherwise you might wander around like a ghost, sort of, like a wandering spirit. That was not a good situation. So these get just deeper and deeper into all the unusual cosmology. So here I'll share with you a story which belongs to my next topic, but I'll say it here. So I knew an airline captain, and he had lived down south of Kailua Kona on the coast along the trail there. And he and his wife lived in a wall tent. That's like World War II. You got a wooden platform, some wooden walls come up about this high, then mosquito netting and stuff that goes up, and then your big tent. So they lived in that. Then later on, he went to school, he became an airline captain, and he bought an old house further up toward the highway. And it was very sparsely furnished, but he had an old Hawaiian who was the caretaker. And I went there one time and stopped to talk to him. And he said one night they were sitting there talking, he and the old caretaker having a beer, and they looked up at the screen door, and there was a man standing at the screen door in a white suit. Well, you know, this is rural Kona over here. There's nobody around with a white suit. And they recognized this guy, both of them. And the old Hawaiian guy put down his beer, went over to the screen door and said, "So-and-so, you don't belong here. Your village is down there, just go down there." So this was probably his funeral suit, this white suit he was in. This is how he happened telling me this stuff, very matter-of-factly. So he told him that and just turned around and walked back over and picked up his beer and started to drink it. Wasn't the least bit fazed by that one. So that's the difference between a real old line Uhane belief from a Hawaiian versus all the overlaid beliefs that are all around in the society today, from the Chinese, the Japanese, the French, the English, and everybody else you can think of, the spooks and goblins from New England. So there was a purified thing of him not being afraid of a ghost at all. It was just a little bit lost. It hadn't been long since the death, and he needed to go back to his home, and he just went right back to his beer. So I thought that was a real interesting illustration of the same kind of thing. And as an illustration to my Hanai family, one time my Hawaiian mom took her and me up to some burial caves to show these family burial caves to me. And so we were up there, and her 13-year-old daughter and 3-year-old grandson were with us, and her father had died before that, shortly before that. Very, very well-known person, knowledgeable in old-time Hawaiian thing. That's why she knew these things. So we were up there, and she was speaking of us, saying, you know, who we are, why we're there, etc., talking to the people, you know, of old there. And when they went back home, she told me later, her 13-year-old daughter said that Papa was there. Well, Papa's her father who had died, right? Papa was there, and she said to her daughter, "What did he say?" He said he didn't say anything, he was just nodding his head and smiling. So different than the stuff that you hear today. Plus, when she went home, unlike many families today from the mainland or somewhere else, the mom didn't say, "Oh, don't say things like that, that's great, don't say stuff like that." You know, that's a kapu topic. Her mother thought that was perfectly normal for her to say, and she told me about it, and I thought it was awesome, you know, just awesome. But I think those two things help you differentiate all the kind of ghost stories on the trek around Chinatown and all the stuff we've got today that come from all these other cultures may not necessarily be true of old-time Hawaiians at all. So yes, you did have a time of the spirit wandering around and not yet having been off to Po, or in the case of Ali'i, off into the heavens. But it's just, the more you dig, the more complex it all gets, the more fascinating it gets to hear about the old times. So I think we're at a good spot to have questions of any type. Again, anything?
So in a lot of cultures, they talk about gods coming down from the sky, and I've heard that Hawaiian has stories like that as well.
Not that I know of, except for one case that I've heard of. They had an offering on a lele, probably a human sacrifice offering, high-level offering, and the tongue of the god came out of the clouds and snatched away the offering. So this was really heavy duty, you know. Now they knew the gods had really seen it. I would say that that was a direct lightning strike that just vaporized that stuff, and the smoke kind of went up. And of course, to the Hawaiians, this, the tongue of the god came down and snatched up the offering. That's a poetic way of saying a lightning. They didn't think of it that way, but the lightning struck the lele and took the offering away. That's the only thing I can think of like that.
Time frame?
I don't know how long ago that was. A legend like that would live a long time. Several hundred years ago, I'd certainly think. How about anything else? Anything else?
On the kapu system, when they ate, it was the eye kapu that was broken.
Right.
Because Kahumanu did not convert until December 4th, 1825.
Right.
So between 1819 and then, she took Kamo Ali'i, took his son, was still drinking, was still rebel-rousing, until she converted and got Christian in December 4th, 1825. And then she was then the overseer of Kamehameha III. She was the Kahuna Nui. So it wasn't until about 1830 when they started destroying all of the objects in Halekiahi,
Aye.
where they had all the bones and all of the other things.
Right.
It is also Keoa who gave up the secrets of the people that were buried in the cliff. That is why Kamehameha asked the other Ho'ulu and Ukumahami to take care of his burials, because Kamehameha did not want Keoa because he had given up the others who were buried in the hillside. So it really took a number of years before the full kapu system was broken.
Well, the thing, now, again, both of us have our own share of knowledge, and so
Yeah.
from what my understanding is, and from all the things that I've read about and so on, the destruction and the burning and everything started taking place immediately, but some of the places like Haleokiawe, Pakalana in Waipio Valley, that's where the ka'ais were, other things, and for some reason the Haleokiawe hadn't been touched either, and when Byron brought back the bodies of Liho and Kamamalu in casks and things, and then they said, go ahead and Haleokiawe. For some reason, it was so sacred that it hadn't yet been destroyed. It still had these things remaining there. So Kahumanu, I know she had things taken from Pakalana, like the ka'ais and other things, and put up in the cliffs of Keoa, and then eventually a worship was there, and they took those things to the palace grounds where they kept the burials and things like that before Mauna Ala, is that it? Mauna Ala was formed. So as far as I know, an awful lot of things had been destroyed early on.
The symbolisms were impacted, and that was primarily from Heva. If they did not have, if Keopolani and Kahumanu did not have the blessing of Heva, a lot of the religious things would not be. Because Heva at that point saw the tide was changing, and he wanted to continue his ways, and he approached the missionaries and things as a co-equal, but they did not accept them as a co-equal.
The what?
As a co-equal, ministers of the churches, they would acknowledge each other for their rank and power.
I've read some things like that. So the tricky part is you read one thing, you read one author, read another author, you get different opinions. So I couldn't just say specifically my specific references, but over a long period of time, I've come to believe that an awful lot of the destruction and things was happening right away when they overthrew the kapu system. And then later.
Kapu primarily is what went right away when it broke.
Right.
The thing to do is we know Kamehameha II was still alive during that time period, even though he was trained in the priesthood by the two brothers. He enjoyed his liquor and all of the other things. So he was more a titular or a ceremonial head. And then once he went to England with his wife and died in 1825, and that is when, during that time, Kahumanu is still using some of the kapus to take Kamauli'i, to take his son. She was a kahuna nui. So various elements is that the kapu system primarily was a vehicle by which they controlled the population.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's, I mean, that, when you really look at it.
Well,
And anyway, I'm just sharing some of the
Yeah.
stuff from Canons, from Uvalite, that they shared with me. And even the time of Cook, when he broke his mast, he was actually saving fishermen from Kohala. He had dropped them off in Kauai, going back. If the people had known that what he had done by saving those people, some of his welcome at the time back in Kealakekua would have been different.
Yeah, I don't know. I never heard
But
about
I'm
that.
saying this is from Ugalite, and it's, you know, it's in the writing that she has that.
This is Rubelite.
He was
That's
tacking back and forth to pick up all of the fishermen in the canoes that couldn't get out of the storm. And that's how he broke.
so Rubelite Johnson wrote that you just talked about. You know, I pay pretty close attention to what she would write.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway, like we're just sharing, it's like this.
right.
Like you say, different schools, different thoughts, but it's just.
Yeah, and that's what's so tricky, because what she's talking about, Rubelite Johnson, she was a very, very Hawaiian, but a professor at UH, and she wrote all kinds of incredible stuff. Some of it published, some of it not. But she really knew her stuff. And so we don't know, because she had her sources, just like Mary Kamena Pukui had her sources, and Kamakau and Malo, and everybody had their own sources from different places, and you have to try to read it all, which I sure haven't. but as you sift through all this stuff, you just try to find, you know, as close to the truth as you can find. Just like here, you're hearing from Aloha Jerry a different thing than what I've heard, and that's what's true. That's why I said it's so kapakahi all around. You know, you get Mary Kamena Pukui saying one thing about Ka'u, and somebody else is saying another thing about Kauai, and it gets real tricky about what really went on.
So, when you look at Pukui's book in chapter 9, page 209 in Nani Kukumi, it talks about aggression, and it tells you what happened to the Hawaiian male from the time the wars were gone, they lost their religion, and you have to remember the Hawaiian population was, you know, if time of Cook it was 300,000 or 400,000. By 1800 it's at 2,000. By 1831 it was 131,000. Many of the Hawaiian males in the late 1820 were leaving on ships by the thousands.
Huh?
So, and a lot of the males then, because they had lost their primary roles, were drinking, and that is why many of the women assumed the roles of leadership and things of that sort during that time.
Right.
So,
And he was ever so right about that. It was just unbelievable in the old times, what happened in the 19th century with all the diseases and things that were brought. You know, the people didn't have the germ theory of disease. They knew there were diseases. They knew they had epidemics back home, but they didn't really realize that they were carriers of measles and things like that wasn't bothering them. And it just devastated Hawaiians and things. Liho Kamamalo go to England. They were wearing all their Western garb, fancy stuff. A whole entourage looked like the people in England when they went. But yet they didn't have any protection against measles, and she dies, and a few days later he dies. Which hugely to the consternation of the British, I'm sure, and horrible for the Hawaiian. So all these things are very, very complex and very, very difficult. So as far as cosmology go, I'd like to share with you for a couple of minutes something, and maybe we can talk about that later. But the Hawaiians today at UH and elsewhere, the Hawaiians are continually called victims, the victims of the colonialists. And when I know the history of the 1800s, which I only started studying about 3 years ago, I like the old times, before the coming of the Western dress and all that stuff. But when I look at all the things they did in the face of becoming aware of an entire vast world which had so many ideas and so many things and so much machinery and tools and iron and everything in them, the way they were so resilient in the midst of this, and how brilliant Kamehameha was at warding off all the people trying to woo him and so on. And then, Liholiho going off to England because there was a lot of liaison with the British, that's for sure. Captain Cook was British. But then you've got all the way up, all through the 1800s, despite this horrible bunch of people, many people dying, which of course the people from the cities that were most close to the foreigners, which would be more likely the well-off people, especially initially, the elite people, are the ones most likely to die off. They're the ones in contact with the foreigners, not the commoners way out in the boonies somewhere. So you're losing off a lot of your really high-end people in that regard. But nonetheless, all through the 18th century, they were just unbelievable. The missionaries came in and developed the Hawaiian alphabet very soon, by 1832. So that's 12 years later. The first printing press west of the Mississippi was here in Hawaii. And they wanted to teach the lay ministers, the Hawaiian ministers, how to teach people about the Bible. They wanted to print the Bible. And they were teaching everybody to read and write, and everybody, man, woman, and child, and old people, all learned to read and write like it was fun. They just thought that was cool, just to learn to read and write. And so by 1850 or so, arguably, I'd say, the Hawaiians were probably the most literate people per capita on the face of the earth. They had these unbelievable memories, and in the Hawaiian newspapers in the second half of the 18th century, they wrote down astounding great long genealogies and histories and all kinds of other things serially in the papers, and we still got hundreds of thousands of words yet untranslated. There's nobody else in the world like that had a very old-time society which suddenly was able to write it all down, and we've got it. No Native American tribe comes anywhere close to that, as far as I know. So we've got a real legacy. So Kalamai, some of you are going to be very upset by what I'm going to say, but Kalakaua was so akamai, he was the first ruler to circumnavigate the world. Now we got rulers all over the place, tons of money, big ships, sailors, all kinds of stuff. That's dangerous as hell back then. Really, really dangerous. Around the world, he had his entourage, he was learning about all the other countries, he had his ambassadors with him to tell people about the country called Hawaii, this little speck of a country out here in the Pacific. And so he circumnavigated the world. His nephew, Prince Kuhio, circumnavigated the world and went to Africa. He sent Kuhio to Japan as an ambassador at age 24, tried to marry him off to a Japanese princess, and of course they politely declined. But then he would have had an ally, the Japanese. He knew all these people were trying to get Hawaii. So Kalakaua goes around, learns all this stuff around the world, decides sugar is the most important thing he could grow here. It's going to be the best place in the world. Turns out he's exactly right. They get all these foreigners that come here, they all get incredibly wealthy, they encroach themselves in the legislature. And in 1893, we get the overthrow. And in 1898, Spanish-American War comes along, and so all of a sudden it's incredibly strategically important in the war for the U.S., and boom, they annex Hawaii. And the rest is history. But if you want to look at it in a very interesting way, it was Kalakaua's effort to learn about the world and his brilliance in putting all this together and getting a sugar reciprocity treaty with the United States, and they got to use some of Pearl Harbor, that was so successful that it backfired and the country was overtaken. That's a strange way to look at it, but I think it's a pretty realistic way to look at it. So I look at it like the Hawaiians, despite their huge loss of population in the 1800s, showed incredible brilliance and resilience against these huge forces of the world, until finally they ended up getting taken over by somebody. The French had tried to take him over in 1839, and that didn't get carried forward and back in France. The English had taken him over in 1843 with another warship, and that didn't get carried when it got back to England. And when America did the same thing in 1893, Queen Kapi'olani thought that they would reverse that. President Cleveland said, "You can't do that." He got voted out of office. So it didn't happen. It was just in limbo, sitting there. And then the Spanish-American War came along, and that was it, annexation. Just messed up the culture, something awful by all the rules of that sort of thing. But they were ruling from afar, and so they just set up all their own systems to make sure it stayed status quo like they had set up. Okay then, so we're going to go on. Next topic. Now, this is what I like. Listen, what about ho'ailona and things that aren't ho'ailona? Ho'ailona is a sign or an omen. So different people would determine, especially today, all kinds of things as a sign or an omen. But in old times, it was more specific kinds of things. So just because it was mystical or really weird or incredibly mind-blowing or something, it didn't mean it was a ho'ailona. It wasn't a sign or an omen. So I've experienced certain things in my time in Hawaii, and I've been all over the islands in different places, high, low, in between, and I've had some experiences that I would say were ho'ailona. Then I've had a lot of other experiences, and people I know have had experiences that are mind-blowing, but I'd still say were not ho'ailona. So I thought that would be a good topic to share with you folks. And so I'll start first with the ho'ailona that I think I've experienced that actually were ho'ailona. Now, just because it's a sign or an omen doesn't mean that you know what it means. You just believe it is a sign or an omen of some kind that you should pay attention to, but not necessarily that you ever know exactly what it means. So, I'll just say a simple one. One time I was hunting turkeys on the big island of Pauhau, and I was driving down toward the ocean. I looked out in the ocean on a clear day, and there's a columnar rainbow standing up in the ocean out there. Just like a big column rainbow standing out there in the ocean. There's a name for that in Hawaii. It's in one of our only. But I don't know what that was, but it's very rare as far as I know. And I think that was ho'ailona. I just don't know what it was about. Maybe it's for somebody else or something. But to me, that was so unique and so unusual, but a known phenomenon in old Hawaii, that I would call that a ho'ailona. Another time I was coming up from Kailua Kona toward Kamuela on the upper road, maybe about halfway in between. I'm looking up to the northwest, and up there is Pu'ukohola, right? The alley kind of curves around, and Pu'ukohola is up there. Just offshore from Pu'ukohola is a shark heiau. It's underwater. I don't know quite how they put offerings there, but it's right out there just off Pu'u. So maybe at times in the past when the ocean was a little lower level, maybe that was actually above water a little bit, or maybe at certain times it was above water a little bit. So I know that. So I'm looking up at the sky just like this, even more blue clear than this. See, there's a little cloud up there and stuff. No, just pure blue sky. And I look up at the sky, and there's a line like this with 5 shark fins, each alike, just exactly the same, on this line up there. White shark fins, just plain as day. I slammed on my brakes and got my camera real quick and got a picture, and it was just starting to break up, and then it went away. And it seemed to me that it was above that shark heiau at Pu'ukohola. That, I think, was a ho'ailona. I don't know what it meant, but it was so unusual, so remarkable, so out of place that I would say that was a ho'ailona. More minor one, and this is kind of on the borderline. I was at upland in Pu'ua'ua'a one time, and we were going around in the forest. There was a great big tree, like a great big koa tree or something. And I heard this eo calling. Well, eo are really shy. Out of the one, they're really shy. And so are pueo. Now the ones with the heart-shaped face, the white heart-shaped face, that's a barn owl. That's not a pueo. A lot of people think all the owls in Hawaii are pueo. No, the pueo is brown. It has a brownish face. The body is brown. Not that big, and neither is the barn owl. So this is an eo. I hear it crying, and I start calling back to it. It kept calling to me. I'm calling back to it, and I slowly approach the tree. Just thinking, try not to think any kind of hostile thought or anything. And I get right under the tree, and I'm talking back and forth to the eel up there. That could be, maybe it was a young eel was very vocal that day or something, but to me that was a Hawaiian lono. That's some kind of thing. I don't understand it. I don't know what it meant at that time. We were on Lanai one time hunting, and right near, well, it wasn't even dusk. We were just kind of walking upland, and a pueo, which are very, very, very shy. You hardly ever see them, came right in and just hovered over us. And I said to her, "You see what I mean?" That's really weird. I mean, that's, to me, a Hawaiian lono thing. I've never talked to anybody else that said a pueo did like that. So let's see. Another time, first time she went with me where we were going to a Hawaiian site, it was La Perouse on Maui on the south side. Yeah. And a friend had taken me in a long time before and showed me an interesting walk-in well near the shore where they actually had walled in a spring and they could walk down and get the water. And she had said, up there on the rocks up there, there's some house sites, just small little house sites where the sometimes fishermen would stay when they came down there. We should go look up there sometime. So we went up there to look. I said, keep your eyes open, people lose things, kids drop stuff down in the crevices and things. So we had seen a squid lure weight, I think, maybe in one of the crevices. Somehow or another, I saw something down below. So we were able to get down there, and I got a stick and got it out, and it was a squid lure weight, something like that. And I turned around and looked down below us, and in a hollow place in the lava down below, there was white coral, like stepstones, in this low place. I knew the Old King's Road was just up from there. So at night, if you were on the Old King's Road and you knew right where to step off, you would go down in this little hollow, you would see these white things, and you could walk right to this little shelter cave. It's just a small little shelter cave, like about 3 men could sleep side by side in there, like fishermen that would come at a certain time of year. Still a little bit of banana leaf and stuff in the floor there. So we were in there. There was that's a horseshoe-shaped brace that goes into a canoe hull. That was there. And there was a couple of remnant gourd stoppers where the gourds had rotted clear away and just the stoppers were left over. And she was away from me, it wasn't very big, maybe about this far, from me, and the rock wall right there had a puka through there. And so I went over to her because I thought I'd look in the puka, because the aihui, the word aihui is thief in Hawaii. They had a thief just like us. And so they would hide things, they would put things, and so I knew people had found things that way looking. And so I'm not afraid. I'm just not afraid of things. I'll tell you another story about that in a minute. But anyway, as I got over to her, there was this weird sound. It was like the Cecil B. DeMille movies of the past, of the Egyptians with the great big gate, and when the 3 men push open the gate, it goes like rock against rock. And she says, "What was that?" Well, I'm thinking, what was that? I have never heard anything like that before in my life, or since. But I put my hand in there anyway, my hand swept around like this and came right onto the neck of something, just like that. And it was like stuck in the rock, like it had been coming up out of the rock. I had to kind of wiggle it to get it out of the rock, and I brought it out, and it was a pohakialoa. That's a real rare type of artifact that's used by deep sea fishermen. It's shaped like a long plumb bob, like carpenters use, to get a vertical on a line. So it was real narrow at the top, came up real narrow at the top, and then flared out just a little bit and had a little flat top on that. And the rest of it was a perfect plumb bob, long plumb bob shape that came down and kind of pointed on the end and was kind of dinked on the bottom where it hit the bottom many times. That's used by a fisherman at a spot that they know exactly where to fish. They triangulate by 2 places when they're out in the canoe looking at, they triangulate a certain place to fish. You can drop your line in and currents can't catch that pohakialoa at all. It's perfectly symmetrical. It'll go straight down, taking all their little cross-pin hooks straight down to that place. And if you don't catch something in 5 or 10 minutes, you might as well go because they're just not there. That's what it was. It was just perfect. It was perfectly made, perfectly symmetrical, all polished, just perfect. And that, whatever that was a whole Ilona. But finding that piece, I didn't have any hesitation about taking it because it was like it was delivered up out of the lava to me, and that's what that noise was, and that's why it was stuck there when I put my hands around it. It was a very spooky experience. So the last one, no, let's see. There's one. Yeah. One other one. We were up going to Javi one time. There was a beach down there where you could get the Ely stones for hula, the real good black, a lot of kani. So we were going there. We came right over the top. We were on the upper road. We came right over the top. We're looking down at the ocean about 8 o'clock in the morning. And you know how when the sun shines through the clouds, it looks like the rays of God shining down through the clouds like that? It was coming out of the ocean. The rays were coming up out of the ocean. Now that was a Hawaii Lola. Whew, chicken skin today. No idea what that meant. Never seen it before. Never heard about it. But we both saw it. That's the way it was. The rays were coming out of the ocean. And the last one, I'm not doing too bad. The last one was a wine blower. My friend from Lanai was Japanese, but he was really into Hawaiian things. His father had lots of artifacts from the past in Lanai, and he was really into that, so we were always talking about Hawaiian things. And so we went up on Haleakala one time, which he had done before, to hunt goats. So instead of bows, we actually had our rifles, but you have to go at the right time of year when it's not going to rain much because the streams will fill up and you can't go anywhere. And you've got to carry as much water as you can and then hope to find enough water left in the little pools in the rocky streams to put purifier in it to drink. So we both had real heavy packs, for 60 pounds apiece, with as much water as we could carry, with some ammo and our freeze-dried food. Well, not freeze-dried, but we had, some kind of sea rations or something and trail mix and stuff. And so they dropped us off about halfway up Haleakala, and the plan was we were going to walk around the mountain, hunt goats, try to get away from where the usual hunters were and stuff, hardcore, trying to get the really big old billy that's really hard to get, really smart. So they dropped us off, and we're supposed to meet them 4 days later at a place called the ballpark, way high up where they had proved it was a place where people would picnic and stuff. So we're supposed to go where we're going to go, then we're going to walk up the mountain till we get to a Sierra Club trail that had cairns of stones about every 100 yards, and follow that up to an old deal in our cabin where we'd stay overnight, and the next morning we'd meet them, right? That's the plan. So we're walking around for about an hour. Beautiful day, just like this. Beautiful day, just fine, no sweat, doesn't feel like rain. And all of a sudden, and even to this day, I can't quite think whether it was an eo or a poeo or sort of a combination, but it came right over my head, like 15 feet over my head. It was just looking at me and hovering there. Totally bizarre. And it was like talking to me. So I'm talking back to it, at least mentally I was. So this went on for a while. Just hovering right there, right over my head. I don't know how high to say, but 10 feet higher than this. Real close. Like, poyos and eos don't either do that. They never do something like that, ever. It wasn't some parakeet or something. It was an eo or a poyo or a combination of both. And finally it gets done, we're having our talk, and it finally goes away. And my friend, Japanese, from Lanai, he's heard plenty of Hawaiian things. He looks at me and he says, "You know what we would do right now if we were Hawaiians, don't you?" I said, "I sure do. I sure as hell do. We would get the hell out of here and go back home, right?" But I said, chicken skin. But we couldn't. There are no more phones. Nobody knows. We're halfway up in the middle of nowhere on Haleakala. We just went on. We didn't have any choice. About an hour later, the sky fell in. I mean, just an absolute downpour. We had a little bitty pup tent, well, just a little emergency type tent, big enough for 2 men lying side by side and a little bit of a vestibule for our packs. That's it. Not real waterproof, just rented it. And so we got our boots on, we put on our parkas, we had those army raid things that slips over your head, we got the little snaps on the sides that doesn't cover your arms much. We both had that. So we were able to set up the little tent. We didn't have a flat place. We were doing it right on the slope of the mountain. We had to. We didn't have any choice. We got in there. We got our clothes on, our boots on. We got our ponchos over us. We put the packs right there in the front of the thing, and we lay down, and the water's running down the mountain under us, just running right under us. And we laid there for 36 hours. 36 hours it poured like that. The water ran under us, and you were huddling against each other trying to stay warm. We're telling each other every life story, everything. We could play games, doing everything. For 36 hours, if you tried to heat up a little food with some sterno or something, you didn't dare touch the little tent, because if you touched it, it would start leaking at that spot. When we got out from under there after 36 hours doing that kind of stuff, I could bend over and put my whole palm under my toe of my boots with my knees locked. I've never been that flexible before in my life. So they were real careful for several more days, and I'm always digging, a little trench around the tent at night. We'd always go to a little high spot. Last night we were at a real nice high spot, trench around it. It happens again. Coming down like mad. There was a little stream near us. The water was literally shooting off the top of a dry waterfall 20 feet out before it would even fall. It was just unbelievable water power. You could have dropped a car and it'd be a mile down the mountain in 5 minutes flat. So we're walking up, right? You never plan to walk down, because if you get a flood, you're going to get stuck, where the streams come together. But you go up, they become milder and milder, the little gullies get less and less, up. So we're walking up, the whole mountain is running water. So it's just, things went from bad to worse. Literally, the whole mountain was running water. It wasn't just in little rivulets or the streams. Everything was running water. We're freezing. We're going up there. We got some meat. We got our horns. We got our rifles. We get well up the mountain, and this noise gets louder and louder. There was a rock formation right up above us. A stream was coming down and hit that rock formation and splitting on both sides of us. We were trapped in there. So there was one tree there, like an ohia about this big, about like that maybe, and I had one of those Japanese folding saws like for the garden. Doesn't even have any offset teeth, it doesn't worth a dirt for cutting things, especially a great ohia tree. We had a fight over who got the saw on it, because whoever was sawing was staying warm and the other was freezing. So we finally got it cut. We cut off all the branches. We threw it downstream a little bit on the one on this side, because there was a slight little island where if we could get the trunk across there, we could walk across this narrow trunk, get on the little island and jump on over. We'd make it. And my friend thought maybe we could wait. I said, you put 1 foot in that water, you're a dead man. It'll take you away and you'll be dead. So we put all the branches in case we did fall off the log, maybe it would catch us. And we went across the log, we both made it. Then we had to go back and get our packs and our rifles and walk across the slick, wet log. Not a very big log. We made it. We got over there. So now it's getting close to dark. We spent a lot of time doing this. Up. We get close to dark. We ran right into one of those cairns from the Sierra Club. Otherwise, we never would have seen it. We'd have walked right past it and gone up the mountain and died. And we saw the cairn. Turned, walked on up till we got to the little cabin. Somebody had left the door open. It had a big puddle of water in the middle of the mud floor. Just slat beds there. They'd long since taken away the mattresses and stuff. And we stripped off all our clothes, heated up all the last of our food, ate it as fast as we could, got in our sleeping bags, got on the hard boards, and tried to go to sleep. And half an hour later, I went to sleep. And the next morning we got up. It was nice. Supposed to meet those guys at 9 o'clock. Nobody came. Nobody came. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, they finally came in a huge, big, jacked up truck with great big knobby tires. And said, we're the first people on the mountain since that rain. First people up here. So the whole thing was this unbelievable, ghastly problem. And I'll tell you, if you ever see an EO or something hovering 50 feet overhead talking to you, go the other way. So that was all I learned. That was really an omen, that really a message. So I thought that was an interesting story. So I'm going to tell you, we got a little bit more time. Now these are the ones I think is not a Ho'ailona. So when the old man got up from the picnic table and said to the man in the white suit at the door, you're at the wrong place, go back home. That's weird, but it's not a Ho'ailona. That's just a weird circumstance. We went one time, I was going to do a talk at a hotel south of Kailua Kona, and they comped us a room. The valet takes us up to the third floor. He goes, opens up the lanai doors, you know. Keha walks over there, looks down. She's pretty sensitive. He leaves. She says, something's not right out there. He never says anything like that. So I feel something. There's something's just not right out there. And I kind of had that same feeling too. So pretty soon we went out, we went down, so we walked down along the beach. There was a heiau, an old heiau, just a little ways down there, with the big vertical slabs, old style, Tahitian style. That was some real old heiau, with the water real close to it, but the water level's higher now than it used to be. So yeah, that's not a ho'elona, but that's a real strange thing, especially for her to say that, and I felt the same. My mentor on the Big Island, Sam Hook, and his friend, they were always going around. He was trained by the old lady and flew in Hawaii until he was 14. That's all he spoke. She was a high-end kahuna, a local class kahuna. And so he was unafraid of burial caves. He knew all about all the wahipana, everything about South Kahala, numerous amount of information from her. And he was up there with Mr. Solomon looking for something, I don't know what. His grandmother had a cave up there at one time with her stuff in it. This one, I think, that raised him. Who knows? But he told me one time he was looking way down, and there was just a speck way down in the distance that he could see with his binoculars, and he said to Mr. Solomon, there's something in the cave there, we have to go down there. They went all the way down there, and I don't know what it was, but something was, and he was feeling it all the way up there. This one was remarkable. When his young daughter was about a year old, he had just got married, he and his wife went down to the ocean to fish, and his tutu lady, the one that raised him, had always said, if you need me, you call me. That means, you know, I'll be your awakua, you call on me. And he was fiercely tough guy. He'd been in Guadalcanal in World War II, survived that. You know, he was a tough guy. And so they went out, and the boat sank, and he knew they were dead. We're going to die. And he finally broke down his pride, and he called on his tutu lady. A current came along and swept them to a buoy. You know how uncommon those buoys out there. It swept them to a buoy. They were able to climb up on the buoy. A boat came along, saw them, and took them back to shore. Ooh. Chicken skin, boy. So that's not a ho'elona, but that's an astonishing thing. Our friend came to see us one time that taught us Hawaiian language at Kamoela. She was about 33 maybe, and she came to see me one time, and she was really freaked out. She said, I was sleeping last night, and I was in a dream, and I was like flying over your land, and I saw you and Keha working down there on the land, and she was just freaked out about this. I said, you had Lele Ikapo, you're not even trying. That means fly in the night with your spirit. She had never heard of that. She's from a really prominent family in Kamoela. They know all kinds of stuff, but she had never heard of Lele Ikapo. So I had to tell her what that is. That's a gift. Don't throw that away. People try for years to do that. You just did it spontaneously. So that's not a ho'elona. That's just really interesting. Let's see. Some of these I'm maybe not going to mention about. Oh, this was really good because it was right here. I don't remember my dreams. Very rarely I remember my dreams. So I came up here with that same guy from Lanai to a Hawaiian event on the Ku'uloa Park out here. We got here kind of late. Things were kind of winding down. So he and I walked on over toward the end of the peninsula. And when we got out to the end of the peninsula, I had had a dream one time when I was on a beach, and there was a woman like my mother and a little kid and an older kid than me. I was like the middle one. And the beach wasn't very wide, you know, maybe from here over to the fence there, and just some low bushes and stuff over here. And then over here, there was a small island, and there was some other stuff out over here. I remember all that. I don't remember my dreams at all. But we got out there, and I could walk on that beach to the exact spot where I was standing in that dream, where I was looking over here and then looking at the things out here and then turning around and looking at Chinaman's hat right here. Walk back and forth on the beach right to where I was in that dream. So that's not a ho'elona, but that's spooky, the spooky kind of stuff. Oh, let's see. One time, I was driving to work. I was a physician. I was wound up about something or unhappy about something. Driving in the morning, I was on the freeway at about 8 o'clock in the morning, right about where Mono is. And I got this feeling to do this. This comes out of nowhere. I did that, and I felt a lot better. A lot better. I have no idea where that came from, none whatsoever, nothing. I just felt a lot better. And I was talking to Kawila Clark one time, who had known a lot of Hawaiian, some of you may know him, a lot of Hawaiian things, and he was over at my house in private time that evening, just him and me. I said, Kalamai, do you know anything about what this would mean? And he said, how do you know that? I said, I don't know. It came to me. I was driving down the freeway. It made me feel a lot better. He said, well, that was part of my training. You could turn away a curse like that. So I thought, man, that is really astonishing. So he told me of a time at Aloha Towers one time. He was with a group of men at the end of one of the great big rooms there. They were talking, and a woman came through the door at the far end, and she was chanting. And he said he knew she was cursing them somehow, and he did that. And she just stopped in her tracks and turned around and left. And the other men said, how did you do that? He said, I was taught to do that. So how did I get that driving down the freeway at 8 o'clock in the morning with my tie on? I don't know. Those are the real strange. Let's see. I got up, this is just myself. Kanae, remember you mentioned Kanae, name giver, Kaami family. She told him, unbeknownst to me, that I would love to have a Hawaiian name. This was many, many, many years ago. And so he gave me the name, and then I got that at Christmas time. I was so stoked, so stoked. And he had told me, one thing in particular, he said, I waited 2 years, finally got the dream. The two old ladies told me two names, Ka'imiloa and Ka'imi'ao'ao, seeking of wisdom or seeking all the time. I think Ka'imiloa fits you better, but that's 24/7, 365. I said, well, I've always liked that all the time. Anyway, I love that name. That's great. I love that name. So we decided, yeah, that's it, Ka'imiloa. So the next morning, I think it was, I was thinking, I wonder if I'll ever have anything longer name, a longer name. And I was walking out to the kitchen, and a voice said in my ear, plain as day, Ka'imiloa A'opuni. Well, I didn't know Hawaiian. It could be dog voodoo or something. I didn't know what it was at all. So I spent about 5 years trying to find kupuna or somebody who would know what that was. Old Tutu and Molokai know. Other people know. And finally in a class with Auntie Edie Mackenzie, Hawaiian Studies class, one evening, and she was in a good mood. I approached her and asked her about that. Oh, come to my office. We got to call Auntie Lilia Holly from Waimanalo. She's the expert on old-time poetic Hawaiian. So she talked to her a little bit. She wanted to talk to me. She was telling me all things about myself. I had no idea how she could know. And she said, Ka'imiloa A'opuni or A'opuni? I said, A'opuni. That means not seeking over the land. It means seeking in all realms. And she talked some more, told me all this stuff, and blowing my mind. Auntie, he had long since gone back to class. He was just blowing my mind with the things she was telling me. And one day, I told her, I don't understand the journey I'm on. I've always, why am I doing this stuff? What's driving me to do these things? And she said, someday you'll understand. It's like when it's a real rough point, there's always terrible waves and everything. You can't get around to the other valley, but sometime in perfect conditions, you can swim around there and get to the other side, then you'll know. That was a poetic way of telling me that. When I finally went back to class, I was shell-shocked. They were well off, half an hour long in the class. And so at the end of our conversation, as far as Ka'imiloa A'opuni, she said, that's your name, use it. So that was it. That's the second part of my name. And years later, I was reading some old Hawaiian dictionary, and I came across the term kahula, and the description was, it means when you get out around some object and get over to the other side under very difficult circumstances. Geez, that's just like she told me. That's the exact description like she told me. But I can't say my name's Ka'imilo Alaputi Kahula, because then I'm just labeling myself a name. I can't do that. And remember I said I hardly ever remember my dreams? I don't have dreams I can remember. And that night or some other night soon after, somebody asked me my name, and in the dream I said my name's Ka'imilo Alaputi Kahula. So I had the Inoapo. So that's why my name is, like I told you, that whole thing. So I don't say that very often because most people wouldn't have a clue and would think that was arrogant and I made it up myself, but that's how I got all of my name. And how we do it pretty good. Sam Hook, my mentor, his tutu lady was a high-end Lono kahuna, like I told you, do all kinds of things. Every year, like about May or June, they would get on her mule and ride all the way from Kahua, which is the high part of the north end of Kohala, all the way down to the saltwater pools, which are clear down in the direction of Kailua Kona. There's these saltwater pools, and they would collect makaloa, dunk it in those pools, and then let it bleach and dry on the rocks, and then repeat that until she had as much as she needed. So he was young, and he would ride on the back of the mule holding on to her, except he was not allowed to look behind, ever. It was always at night, old style, riding at night, right? There was always a light behind them, lighting the trail in front of them. And he would tell me stuff like this, matter of fact, no bragging, no, nothing. He was a very matter-of-fact man. That was just a fact. That's how it was when he was 6 years old or something. She chanted all the way down there and the light followed him along behind. So that's not a Hawaii Lono, but that's a really interesting thing. Let's see. I told you about the papa in my Hawaiian family and appearing when we were at the Burial Caves, and he was smiling and nodding his head. Let's see. Oh, Pat Bacon. It was the hot-eyed daughter of American Menefukui, yeah? Learned all the hula and all these things. She told me one time when she was young, they were out in one of those valleys between Honolulu and Hawaii Kai somewhere, and her friends were goading her about, well, we want to see an ukulele, what do you call it, a ukulele or something, and she said, she started chanting, and the ukulele came and bounced on the hood of the car and scared the living daylights of all of them. And she was such a, she's Japanese originally, totally matter of fact, very serious person. To hear her tell me that story was a real mind blower. One time, these are things I'm just telling you from oral history that I think are real interesting. So he's up at Kahua. His father made him get out of Kamehameha schools and go back and work on the ranch when he was about 16. He hated that. And so on Saturday they would go down to Kauai High, watch a movie or something, you drink or whatever. The horse is going to get you all the way back. So he's all the way back pretty near Kahua Ranch, and his horse just freaks out, just goes completely nuts. And of course, these cowboys, they don't put up with anything like that. They can control a horse, but I guess he got the horse under some sort of control, but there was a kualele. That's what was freaking the horse out. One of the orangish red ones supposed to be the male ones. I think the blue-green ones are supposed to be the female ones. And that's what was freaking out the horse. And so they got back to the monk, and his father got up and said, what's going on? He must have heard the horse acting up or something, or sensed it, I don't know. And so he told his father what happened, and he wanted to give the kualele some tobacco, some cigarettes. Something. His father said, don't ever feed that kualele. That's a spirit, And there used to be an old kahuna lady that lived in a cave over there. She's the one that was doing that she had sent that. I think she was probably long dead, but this was her kualele, supposedly, according to him. And so don't feed it. Absolutely do not feed it. And that was interesting to hear from oral history. And another thing he told me was that a man he knew was drunk, showed up at his house like 1 o'clock at night, freaking out, wanting tobacco, wanting some cigarettes or tobacco, because of the same thing. And Akualele wanted the tobacco. And the guy was so crazy drunk, and finally he just punched him and knocked him out and put him on the couch until he woke up the next morning. But he's just telling me this like a normal, ordinary thing. No bravado, no exaggeration, nothing. So I've heard a lot of interesting things. I went to Puakaloa, you know, the training camp up on Mauna Kea. I used to hunt up around there a lot, so I've been up there hunting, and I had a rental car, a little one, and I puked the gas tank coming out up there. So I managed to get down the hill and most of the way back to the place at Puakaloa. So here I am in all my camo. I got my camo on my face and everything. I'm carrying a shotgun, and I'm walking into the base there, but I was in the Navy, so I didn't look like an officer, but I was an officer in the Navy. Walked in, and these guys are lolling around in the Quonset huts and things. And so I said, you know, my car's ran out of gas up there. Oh, well, we'll go get it. So they went out, they got it, hauled it back, going to take it to the motor pool. Went and got some guy that was drunker than a skunk, put him in the shower, got him sobered up enough to go fix my puka in the gas tank. So I have a lot of time to talk to them. So I asked them, you know, Pele Legends, this is Mauna Kea, not Mauna Loa, but Pele Legends, you ever see anything weird up here? Open-ended question, right? Yeah, there's this white dog that runs around up here. We see it. We shot that thing with everything under the sun. We can't kill it. They don't have anything to know about Pele's dog or anything. But that's kind of cool chicken skin stuff, too. I like asking open-ended questions and ask people what they think. So, let's see. We were hunting one time on Molokai, and if you come out of the airport and go Mauka towards Mauna Loa area there on Molokai, part way up, if you went off the main road, they had a kind of a cottage up there where we would stay and hunt. So we went off on a hunt one morning with a couple of them, looking for game birds, and we came back and we're heading towards the upper end of the valley there to go across to the cabin. And there was a bunch of lantana and stuff, and I kind of pushed through that. It was a platform, a stone-paved platform there, higher at the front than at the back. No, nothing else, no suggestion it's hail, just a platform looking right down the valley. And I just knew that was a hula pa. I don't see what else it could have been. It was a hula pa there. And I stood out there in the front of that. I'm looking down the valley, and I just knew the cave of Kapu, which is a sorcery goddess, but also involved in hula. There's different kapus, I think. How in the world I would have that come in my mind and know the cave of Kapu is right down there in a certain place, but I just knew that. And we went back and put our things up in the cabin, and we went looking. We didn't have too much time. We never did find it. That's real strange stuff, but I really enjoy things like that, and the things that might pop in your mind, and if you don't freak out about it, but you know about historical things, really interesting things. So enough already, and a good time for questions.
Where was the shark hail? Was it the shark hail? Was that the big island?
Yeah, that's a big island. It's in the water right out down the Lopukohala Heiau. So you just below it is Mailakini is the restored long, low heiau just below that. And then just below that there's a grove of trees, and then the water out from there is the shark heiau, not very far out.
Just south of Lapakai State Park, there was supposed to be a heiau.
Yeah, right about, that must, if it's a shark heiau, Lapakahi. No, Lapakahi's further up. No, it's not up there.
There's supposed to be one there too, I think.
I don't know about that one. Anything else? Anybody else got any questions? So let's take a break, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes and we'll do the last talk and have a good time.